Hey, Manuel here from SCE. Good afternoon, everybody. Just checking on our status of our speakers is I did see that Dr. Kim Petrie came in earlier. Is Dr. Petrie, are you still with us?
I am.
Oh, very good. Okay. And I'm not seeing you. Did you have to dial back in, or are you participating via Teams?
Oh, there, I see Kim now.
Okay.
Hi.
Got
Thank you.
Can you see me now?
Yep, sorry.
Thank you.
If we have one glitch in Teams, then we'll be a victorious day. We've used our glitch. I see John Kotek is with us as well, and is Tom Isaacs with us as well?
Yeah, hello, I'm here.
Okay. Hey, Tom, thank you very much. Okay, well, maybe we should begin. My name's David Victor. I'm chairman of the Community Engagement Panel. I want to welcome everybody to our meeting today, Thursday, February 10th. We're starting this meeting early for the convenience of our guests from the Department of Energy in Washington, D.C., where it's 3 hours ahead of us right now, and really want to thank them for joining us. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Thank the members of the CEP and to the general public for joining us as well. This meeting, safety moment for the day, you may have noticed we're still in a pandemic. And despite some of the good news, let's continue to follow the guidance of local health officials. This meeting is being done virtually because of the pandemic, and we'll keep looking at that on a regular basis and see, I hope sometime soon we can have a meeting fully or partially in person. I know I'm a professor here at UCSD, and we have students back in the classroom, and it's really nice to see people. So I hope we can get to that point sometime soon. I just want to remind everybody that CEP is not a decision-making body. It's a two-way conduit. It's engagement. It's engagement between the operators of the decommissioning plant, Southern California Edison, its contractors, its partners, and so on, and the communities that are affected in various ways by the closure of that plant and by all the other things associated with the closure of that plant. So it's designed to open and sustain a two-way flow of information, ideas, actions, and it's an engagement body, not a decision-making body. PowerPoint slides for today, and there are many of them, were posted last Thursday. We have some additional slides from presenters today that are now, I believe, also posted on the site. And I want to thank Julia Martinez at Songs for running the slides for us today. So thank you very much for that, Julia. We can put the next slide up. We're going to look at the agenda for today. I have a few opening comments, very brief. And then we're going to move straight into the main attraction, the main topic. We're going to hear from Dr. Kim Petrie, who serves as Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition for the U.S. Department of Energy. And she's going to help us understand the DOE's request for information, which is ongoing right now. She'll tell us a little more about when this information is due, with a particular emphasis on what is consent-based siting for a federal consolidated interim storage facility. What does it look like? What do people want to get out of this? This is a topic that's near and dear to everyone's hearts because it's central to us moving the spent fuel out of here. And DOE is focused on this. A lot of folks in Congress are focused on this. There are other plants that are focused on this. And hopefully we're going to get something done here. And so really delighted to have Dr. Petrie with us here today. She leads the team, just for larger context, she leads the team at DOE that is working on how to allow and encourage the removal of spent fuel from Songs and other commercial plants here in the United States. So I think we're in very good hands. After that, we're going to hear from some local reactions, two representatives of the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now Coalition. Maybe someone will tell me how you pronounce that coalition's acronym. Prize to the best pronunciation, I suppose. So Christian Abug, who is filling in for Orange County Supervisor Lisa Bartlett, and Crystal Javara, who is filling in for San Diego County Supervisor Jim Desmond. Following that, we're going to have some perspectives from John Kotek from NEI. John came and spoke to our group when he was at DOE and on other occasions. He's going to tell us a little bit about the industry, both the national perspective, international perspectives, and then also what he sees industry here in the United States doing to help us out with this important mission. And then we're going to hear from Tom Isaacs, who volunteers as an advisor to the Spent Fuel Now Coalition, serves as an independent strategic advisor on spent fuel management to Edison, variety of other very important roles on this topic. So it's a terrific lineup, all focused on the question of how do we create a viable consent-based program and really make it work. And so it's very important. For members of the CEP, as these presentations are going on, just unmute your microphone. I'll see that miraculously on Teams, and then I can give you the floor. And then for members of the public who'd like to make comments, you can, we'll have a whole hour dedicated to public comment, along with a fairly extensive, hopefully, opportunity for us to get reactions to those comments, and that'll happen later today. And then we'll have facilitated, as is our custom, a facilitated public dialogue in response to those comments from folks at DOE, from John Kotek and others, and that'll be right near the end of our meeting. Next slide, please. Excellent. So I'm going to make a few opening comments, not much, but a couple. I want to just go to the next slide, please, to slide 4. And here you'll see directions, as is always the case, directions on how to submit comments in writing. Up to 2 days prior to the meeting, you can send them to this email address. We're now at the meeting time. And so those comments received will get priority for making public comments and also for answers today. During the meeting, if you want to make a comment, just submit this form, which asks for your name and if you're dialing in by phone, your last 4 digits of your phone number, I think, so we know who you are, and then we can give you the floor at the right time. And Dan Stetson and Martha McNicholas will facilitate that process once we get those comments. I think I'll ask if we could put into the chat that link to the CEP public comment form. It's also on songscommunity.com, but let's also put it in the chat so that we can people can just click on that if you're running the app or you're on the web service for Microsoft Teams. Next slide, please. A great pleasure to welcome Mike Frost, who's Mayor Pro Tem from City of Dana Point, and he's the newly appointed alternate for Michael Villar, who's the CEP member from Dana Point. And I think Mike is with us today, and really please join me in extending our welcome to Mike, and thank you very much for joining us and contributing to this meeting and to the larger community engagement panel process. Go to the next slide. I'm going to hand the floor over now to Doug Bowder.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Petrie and from the DOE and John Kotek from NEI. Thank you both in advance for your participation today. We really appreciate it. I'll be brief with my opening remarks today so we can spend the bulk of the agenda on the topics of interest. If you could go to slide 7, Julia, that would be great. We've been following the same safe decommissioning principles now, the same 3 ever since the start of decommissioning: safety, stewardship, and engagement. Safety is really number 1. As we're getting into more complex decommissioning activities, we're keeping worker safety and public safety top of mind, and a strong oversight with respect to making sure we achieve and maintain high safety standards. In the area of stewardship, as we continue to dismantle the site, the aspects of environmental stewardship become more and more important. We do have SCE and SDS, our decommissioning contractor. We have experts dedicated to protecting the environment during the dismantlement work. And as far as engagement, we're continuing there to build the Spent Fuel Coalition and be open in public meetings like this one as to how we can share progress in that area. And we're continuing to build out the website and also our public tours, which I'll talk about in a moment. Slide 8, please. The big picture here gets into dismantling above ground structures, safely managing the spent fuel while it's here on site, and advocating for disposal. We've done a lot of work here in dismantlement through 2021 and ongoing, and this year will be actually a really big year for deconstruction of the site. So move to slide 9 if you would, please, Julia. Just to show everyone again, this is a snapshot of our Songs decommissioning website. The website's a really good source for getting accurate facts on decommissioning, including we actually have time-lapse videos on the website of the dismantlement activities. We have restarted our public tours. We did cancel the tour on February 5th, I believe, due to COVID, but we have one coming up on Saturday, February 26th, and ongoing throughout the year. Tours are a very good way to get a handle on what's happening here, so please encourage folks that are interested to sign up for one. Our fourth quarter decommissioning update is hitting the mailboxes now locally within a 5-mile radius, and you can see the URL link on the screen here for the update. We closed out 2021 with a lot of activity. We demolished 35 of 62 buildings on site and shipped about 60 million pounds of waste off site. This year, key work streams include continuing the demolition and building out our rail yard facility to actually increase our off-site shipments. In the end, we will move about 1 billion pounds of waste off of the San Onofre site. With today's focus on the spent fuel program, I'm really going to pause there. David, we're not going to dive in detail here on decommissioning activities. We will continue to post the updates to the website in terms of the decommissioning digests and other methods, and I'm pleased with the website activity. We monitor it quarterly, and the activity on the website, the number of hits and the number of documents that have been opened continues to go up. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, David.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Doug. And I just want to, for the public's benefit, normally we have more pictures and videos of things being taken down and moved and other things being done. I've asked us to reserve more of our time today for the core part of the meeting because we've got just so much to cover and such a terrific group of speakers. So I want to go to slide 10 now, please. And want to welcome Dr. Kim Petrie from the U.S. Department of Energy. You're right in the middle of this request for information, the RFI process. Help us understand what it is that the DOE would like to learn from the RFI process, and then also what some of the things are in addition to providing comments to the RFI, and we'll make sure there are links. I think there are already links on scienceCommunity.com providing comments to the RFI. What else can we be doing to be helpful? So the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the invitation, and we're pleased to be here. And thank you for your generosity in hosting us a couple weeks back. It was great to see songs in person and really get an understanding of what you all have been working through and managing over the last decades. So let me get started. My name is Kim Petrie. I'm the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition in the Office of Nuclear Energy in the Department of Energy. And first slide, next slide. So nuclear energy is essential to tackling climate change. It currently provides 20% of our nation's electricity and half of our clean, emission-free energy. We absolutely need nuclear to achieve 100% clean electricity sector and net zero emissions by 2050. As we continue to deploy nuclear energy as a solution for decarbonization, increasing access to energy and tackling climate change, we need to make progress on management of the spent nuclear fuel. And inaction on this issue has already cost the taxpayers, you and I, nearly $9 billion in settlements and judgments. And while spent nuclear fuel is stored safely all over the country, the communities, including yours, that have the spent nuclear fuel never agreed to host the material long term. And we do recognize that. It is our responsibility, the Department of Energy's, to those communities to move the spent nuclear fuel to an interim storage facility, and the time to start work on that is now. We cannot continue to defer the problem for future generations to figure out. So management of the spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste is the Department of Energy's responsibility. And we are working to develop a comprehensive integrated waste management plan that will address management of the spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. An integrated waste management system will include consolidated interim storage capacity, a permanent disposal pathway, and the transportation infrastructure needed to move spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. So in order to sustainably and responsibly manage the spent nuclear fuel, we need to site both interim storage and permanent disposal facilities. And we will need to identify willing host communities that are informed to be our partners in this mission. Next slide. So right now we're specifically focused on interim storage. As a part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, Congress provided the department funds to move forward on establishing a federal interim storage capability. So with this final FY21 appropriation, we can now pursue activities related to the process for identifying an interim storage site. So interim storage will allow for the removal of the spent nuclear fuel from reactor sites, promote new jobs and economic opportunities for host communities, and begin reducing liability to U.S. taxpayers. It will also provide useful research opportunities and build trust and confidence with stakeholders and the public by demonstrating a new approach to siting. Next slide, please. The department is committed to a consent-based siting approach to siting that enables broad participation and centers equity and environmental justice. Consent-based siting makes the needs of people and communities central to the siting process. Communities can elect to participate by and working collaboratively through a series of steps and phases with the department as the implementing organization. And each of these steps and phases helps a community determine whether or not and how hosting a facility is aligned with the community's goals. So by its nature, the consent-based siting process has to be flexible, adaptive, and responsive to communities' concerns. The phases and steps, therefore, are intended to serve as a guide, not a prescriptive set of instructions. And consent-based siting will look different in each individual community. By working through the consent-based siting process collaboratively, the department hopes to build trust and beneficial working relationships between us and a potential host community. And potential outcomes from this consent-based siting process could include a negotiated consent agreement defined by the community in collaboration with the department, or a determination that after exploring all of the options, the community is simply not interested. We consider both to be successful outcomes. And we understand that this is a daunting challenge, but we believe the consent-based siting approach is both the right thing to do and our best chance for success. Next slide, please. In December, we took a first step towards making progress on meeting that responsibility. Hopefully, many of you saw that the department issued a request for information on a consent-based siting process to identify sites to store the nation's spent nuclear fuel. We published the RFI in the Federal Register, and it is open until March 4th of next month. Next slide. We are not yet seeking communities to volunteer to host sites. Rather, we are interested in hearing from the public on a range of topics. The consent-based siting process itself, also removing barriers to meaningful participation, especially for groups and communities who have not been historically well represented in these conversations. And also interim storage as a component of the integrated waste management system. We have a special focus on ensuring that issues of equity and environmental justice are built into the consent-based siting process, as well as the waste management system as a whole. And we're going to use this feedback that we receive from the RFI to develop a federal interim storage program that uses consent-based siting to work with willing host communities. And while this RFI is specifically focused on an interim storage facilities for spent nuclear fuel, we expect to learn from the RFI to apply siting permanent disposal facilities in the future, and potentially siting efforts for other technology and other place-based initiatives. So I want to take a moment to emphasize that we plan to take the feedback that we receive through this RFI very seriously. And some of our next steps absolutely depend on what we hear from all of you through the RFI. And so while some of you may have engaged on consent-based siting in the past, and we are certainly taking that input into consideration, I sincerely hope you will consider responding to the current RFI. Next slide. As I mentioned, we are using feedback from the RFI to inform some of our next steps. So in the near term, we're doing a few things. We're hard at work analyzing the responses to the RFI. We've gotten many already, and we expect to get more up until March 4th. And also, we are further developing the draft consent-based siting process from 2017 that was originally drafted. We're revising it and further developing it. We're also clarifying our broader strategy for an integrated waste management system as a whole. And lastly, we'll be issuing a funding opportunity for interested groups and communities later this year. So as we work towards progress on this issue, we hope you'll continue to engage with us and allow us to benefit from your expertise and perspective as a community currently hosting a decommissioning nuclear plant. By prioritizing communities and people, we believe we can find a solution to the decades-long stalemate on managing the nation's spent nuclear fuel and keep driving towards the clean energy future we all need. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to taking questions at the appropriate time. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I want to first, before we go on in our program, I want to see if there are any immediate questions for Dr. Petrie. And if you're a CP member, just take your phone, not your phone, take your microphone off mute to ask the question. I'm going to go first to Rob Howard.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Petrie. Really do appreciate you all. You thanked us for adjusting our schedule, but we appreciate you all hanging in with us because it's going to be getting late by the time we're done. I had a couple of questions for you. One, I am really looking into the RFI process, and it's a little bit different than what we normally see as an RFI process where it sounds like to me, and I want to make sure I'm absorbing it correctly, you're actually looking for communities and individuals to ask questions about the storage sites. And the reason I asked that, because I was wondering if the DOE scientists had actually provided a list of what they believed requirements would be to site the fuel first before people are saying, hey, I want to know about it. I'm just trying to figure out how, as I'm communicating with individuals in other areas of the country that might be interested, what should I be telling them, I guess is the question. Did that make sense to you, Dr. Petrie?
I think so. Okay, so let me start with this RFI is really helping us figure out how to do this in the most effective way that is the most inclusive and responsive to all the communities in the United States who may be interested in hosting. We have not eliminated anywhere as a technical issue, right? And there may be places in the United States that can't host an interim storage facility, but we're not ruling anything out. We want to be open and inclusive and have conversations with all the communities that have any interest whatsoever. And so this RFI is to help us figure out how to put that process together in the most flexible, adaptive, and inclusive way. So we're not actually asking for host communities to volunteer yet, or that will be part of the funding opportunity later this year. And the RFI is helping to inform our planning for the funding opportunity and other things that we're trying to do to move this whole thing forward so that we don't.
Okay, I think that makes a lot more sense. And then the second question is communicating. How is the Department of Energy communicating this out? I mean, I'm thankful that I'm able to be here, a part of the CEP, and we're getting that information, and of course we'll be sharing it. But other than that, because I think some of the communities would not be on the radar at all, that I think would probably be decent sites for interim storage. And I'm just curious the process for that. And then lastly, communicating that to communities that normally would be considered underserved or pretty much out of the process and wouldn't find out about this until after you're farther down the tracks.
Okay, so what we've put together, and so the department is taking a different strategy this time. We're placing the focus on a lot of the social aspects of this whole process, not just the technical ones. And so in doing that, the whole stakeholder engagement process is hugely important. And so we are trying to, we have a team of communication staff that is trying to get the message out as widely as possible. And we are open to hosting any meeting just like we're here today, we've been open to hosting any meeting anywhere in the United States. If people have questions and want to ask us about the process that we're going through, we're happy to host them and engage at this point and farther on down the process. And then what was the second question? I'm sorry.
Just basically the process you're going through, how are they getting to historically underserved, or I call them underestimated communities that are not normally in the process until later when most of the decisions have been made?
Understood. Yes. Okay. So there's a couple things that we're doing. One is that we engage directly with a lot of tribal nations, and we have them involved in several groups within the Department of Energy and the Office of Nuclear Energy. So there's a lot of engagement on that front, as well as we're making a push to hire several social scientists that are able to help us interact more effectively and equitably with environmental justice concerns in mind this time around, which is not something that we have traditionally done in the past during this kind of a process. So we're really trying to build equity into this process.
And lastly, thank you for your patience. If someone wanted to help you as far as connecting to maybe some of those groups, then your contact information is available, or the folks who are doing that work, their contact information available? Because we do have groups around the country that actually are really interested in this but don't know where to start.
Okay, so the Department of Energy has a website specifically for consent-based siting, and we have there's an email that's available. I'll make sure that that's either pasted in the chat or something like that, so that you guys can either email directly our team or go to the website and contact information will be there. So I'll make sure that one of my team puts that up so that you guys have access to that information.
And thank you so much for allowing me this much time. I really appreciate it and apologize for taking so long with these, but this is really interesting.
No apologies needed or expected. These are the right questions to be asking. Let me just connect a couple dots, and I'm going to go to Dan Stetson, who wants the floor. I think one of the things is different. I think the idea of consent-based siting has been, discussed as good practice for quite a while. It goes back to the Blue Ribbon Commission. I'm sure John Kotek's going to talk about this. I think one of the things that's different this time around, in addition to the larger push backed by funding to actually do it, is that the politics have also shifted, in particular the role of political concerns around environmental justice and siting questions. They were always there, but they're much more acute now than even in the past. And so I think that's really, really important for us to pay attention to, because the politics have shifted there. The other thing I wanted to just connect something you said, Dr. Petrie, to the larger process here, is that this is about the process and engaging ideas and communities and consent. What does consent really mean in practice? Later this year, there'll be a process also whereby communities can seek some of the benefits and put their hat forward, put their name forward as a community where one or more of these facilities could be hosted. There are already a couple communities working with private developers, and that's what we were learning from the rest of the world, is that this needs to be set up in a way that the communities that host these facilities see a conspicuous benefit. And so it's really encouraging to see DOE not just doing the process that you're doing right now with the RFI, but also the larger process where there could be benefits then that connect back to these communities. And I think that's going to be what's key to making the politics go forward here. I want to give the floor to Dan Stetson and see if there are any other CEP members who'd like to ask questions. I have a couple, but I'm going to hang back. But right now, Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Dr. Petrie, for participating today. I really want to applaud you and your team for, first and foremost, working to rebuild trust with the local community. I think that's key, and I really appreciate all you're doing. After having gone through this consent-based planning process before and looking at Yucca Mountain and the Blue Ribbon Commission and all of those things, I'm sure you can appreciate and understand the public's frustration and skepticism in the whole thing. There again, going back to the importance of trust. My question to you is, what has the Department of Energy learned from going through this process, and how are you incorporating that in this new process? Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'll start with the process that we started back in 2015, I think, 2014, something like that, with under John Kotek's leadership at the Office of Nuclear Energy, really kickstarted this whole thing that the consent-based siting process, that is not something that's new. Other countries have been doing this for much longer than we have successfully. And you'll note Canada is very close to narrowing down their site for their own long-term storage, and as have other countries in Europe. And we are working towards that same goal of being as inclusive and responsive as possible. The strategy that we're working towards is to be flexible and adaptive. And I understand we're the federal government, and that's a heavy lift, but we're doing everything that we can to try and adhere to those principles in everything that we are doing to plan and move this process forward. We have a very dedicated team of individuals who are highly focused on helping solve the climate change problem. And nuclear energy has to be part of the solution, but nuclear energy has this spent nuclear fuel management problem. And so in order to rise to the challenge of combating climate change, we absolutely must fix the back end of this fuel cycle and find somewhere for this material to go that communities didn't volunteer to have long term in their, so did that answer your question at least partially?
Partially. I understand it's very complex. Along, and each one builds on the other.
Dan, can you say what you just said again? Because I think you cut out, at least to my audio, you did.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank her for her comments and add that all of these things certainly are cumulative. Each one builds on the other, and we certainly appreciate the department's efforts to rebuild trust.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I want to see if there are other CEP members. I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to ask a couple questions and see if others want to come in. Just want to remind everybody, March 4th is the deadline. We'll put into chat the email address. It's also the email address is in the RFI, and I'll put it in my one-page readout from the meeting for today. It's consent-based siting at headquarters.doe.gov. I'm curious, Dr. Petrie, about two related questions. One of them is, what are you hearing already, if that's appropriate to talk about that? And second is, the questions seem generic about process, which seems fitting and proper, but I'm curious as to whether you're as interested about consent for transportation as you are for siting, or is this really about siting of an interim facility and transportation as the Department of Transportation and the railroad's problem?
Okay, so I will address the first question, and then I'm going to hand the transportation question over to Dr. Erica Bickford in a second, because she's our transportation expert, and she can give you more details on that. So we have received, like I said, we did receive many comments already, and we can't disclose the exact content at this point, but we are hearing things that we expected to hear, some things that we didn't expect to hear. There's a wide range of opinions on this topic. A lot of people have confirmed that if they submitted comments in the prior RFI several years back, they've confirmed that they either that they still support their same views, and maybe they've changed a bit. And so we're taking all of that feedback into consideration as we draft our strategic plan to move forward, and also how we craft the funding opportunity So all of this is going to, it's all very interconnected, and we are really, really excited and hopeful that we get a wide breadth of comments from across the spectrum to really help us inform this whole strategy moving forward. We really do need your help in order to make this successful.
Okay, thanks. I want to see if there's any before we go on to the next segment. See if there are any other questions from the. Eric, I'm sorry.
Can we
Yeah,
turn it over to Dr. Bickford for the transportation question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Erica Bickford.
No problem.
The floor is yours to talk about transportation.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Bickford. I work for Kim Petrie, and I focus on planning for the future transportation of spent nuclear fuel. So for the question about consent and transportation, the short answer is there isn't consent for spent fuel transportation the same way there is for what we're discussing in terms of an interim storage facility that a community would host over a period of many, many years. However, the longer version of that is there are built into the existing regulatory structure many avenues for state, tribal, and local governments to provide input into how shipments are moved. So for example, just on routing, for highway routing, you have states and tribes are able to designate preferred routes for transporting hazardous material, including spent nuclear fuel, where the department may use, well, we're planning to primarily use rail for transport. There may be locations where you have to use heavy haul truck to get to a rail location. Those heavy haul truck shipments would require permitting, which would require local permits. So local governments would have input and a say in that process. And then for routing by rail, you have a relatively new, it's 2008, so not brand new, but newish, regulation for routing hazardous materials, which includes spent nuclear fuel, that has a process for rail carriers to identify routes, and they have to consider 27 different factors. And among those factors is seeking input from state and tribal governments on security risks for those shipments. So there are those avenues built into the existing transportation regulatory structure. In addition, based on sort of the long-standing framework that DOE has built for its hazardous materials, or specifically radioactive materials transportation programs. Some of you may be familiar with the shipments of transuranic waste to the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIPP. And that really has been a successful model of departmental transportation of radioactive materials, and involves a lot of close coordination between states and tribes and DOE. It involves extensive training for emergency responders along routes, and public communication and technical assistance. So that's what we're planning to model future spent nuclear fuel transportation, which would include providing funds to states and tribes to enable their emergency responder personnel to be well trained to manage the very unlikely event of an incident with the transportation of spent nuclear fuel. David, does that get to your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think the larger point here is there's already a system in place, because a lot of this, not a huge amount, but some moves around. And, you know, over the years, you and Steve Maharis have both been very helpful in helping this panel understand what's going on with regard to the movement of either spent nuclear fuel from the military side or similar kinds of materials, especially as they're going to the WIPP facility in New Mexico, which is located just west of the possible Eddie Lee facility that is one of the private interim storage facilities that's now taking shape. Thank you very much. One more question for you, Dr. Petrie, and then I'm going to go on to the next segment of our program. You mentioned that later this year communities can sign up, as it were. Already 2 communities have signed up, and there's lots of dramas about local legislation and so on. One in West Texas, one in eastern New Mexico. We've been visited actually by some representatives of the eastern New Mexico location. We've talked a lot to both locations. What's the relationship between those places that are already moving forward with NRC licensing, and lots of the politics associated with that, and the communities that you talked about signing up, starting later this year? Are they potentially one and the same? Are they totally distinct worlds? How should we think about that?
Great question. Okay, so I'll start with the fact that Congress gave us specific language that we have to adhere to as we execute this program, and that is to develop a federal interim storage facility using a consent-based siting process. The private initiatives you mentioned, they are welcome to participate in our consent-based siting process, but they're not federal facilities, and they they haven't gone through a consent-based siting process that we're developing because it isn't developed yet, right? So there isn't really any connection at this point, but they, like I said, they are welcome to participate, however that might look.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to come back to that subject. Ted Quinn, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me okay?
Now we can hear you, yes.
Okay, very good. Well, good afternoon. I want to thank Dr. Petrie for this. This is tremendous to see, and also to have John Kotek and this discussion for our Southern California area. My name's Ted Quinn. I'm also one of the people on the ANS task force, Dr. Petrie, that will be responding to the RFI from our task force. And I just wanted to ask your comments on the type of input that we intend to give, and it really relates to the benefits or opportunities that could encourage local, state, and tribal governments to participate. So the kind of comments we want to provide, and this is advanced to you, is we'd like to know subsequently, what would this interim storage facility potentially look like in a very general sense? What benefits can be provided to the community? Co-location of other advanced research and development, safety centers, educational partnerships, land utilization, and it really follows in what you described as a flexible relationship, open and also building that trust. Can you comment on how you see the subsequent area after you gain all your information?
So I think what you're asking is, what do we think the funding opportunity would look like?
It's funding and also the subsequent steps that you see. Do you see a report coming out? You said you were going to you would use the input from all of the responses to craft a wide variety of your programmatic approach. And I wanted to see if included in that is your addressing research activities that can be co-located, educational, and real benefits to the community beyond financial.
Absolutely. Right. And so, yeah, so we're taking this information that we're getting from the RFI, and we're using it not just to help us craft this funding opportunity announcement, but also to help us write a strategic plan, which will essentially be the guiding document for this program for the next however long, right? 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And as a part of that, we're doing some research right now on how co-location of other kinds of facilities with an interim storage facility. And it's definitely something that is under consideration, and we'd like to hear more about what communities might like to see that be. But we wanted to keep the questions in the RFI very general because we don't want to limit people's imaginations, right? So we at this stage in the game, we are really keeping it very wide open, and hopefully the information that we do get will help us narrow down our focus on things that communities really want.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I don't see other questions from the CEP, so I want to go on to the next segment and be able to keep coming back to these issues. But right now I'd like to bring in some local perspectives, people who've been very heavily involved with the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now Coalition, which is anchored by Orange County and by San Diego County. First, we're going to hear from Christian Abuig from Orange County, and then we'll hear from Crystal Jabara from San Diego County. But Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Petrie, for that wonderful presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christian Abweg. I'm here today representing Orange County Supervisor Lisa Bartlett. I'm the supervisor's policy advisor on songs-related issues. As much as the supervisor would love to be here, regrettably, due to an unforeseen change in her schedule, she was unable to participate in this meeting. But on behalf of the supervisor, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate. Supervisor Bartlett expresses her complete support and appreciation for the Department of Energy's recently released request for information on consent-based siting for interim storage. The RFI is an important first step towards the restarting of federal spent fuel program, which is critical to the eventual relocation of spent fuel that is currently being housed along our coastline. Supervisor Bartlett is a member of the CEP and a proud representative of South County communities located directly north of Songs. She strongly supports the consent-based siting process to relocate the spent fuel stored here in Southern California and at other sites across the state and the nation to a permanent repository and consolidated storage facility. Supervisor Bartlett also serves as the co-chair of Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now, a new coalition which was formed in March of 2021 to advocate for the federally licensed storage or disposal facility. The supervisor looks forward to working with the coalition to respond to the RFI and encourage others to do the same. Increased participation will help support the consent-based siting process and move the effort forward. It is also helps ensure that we have a voice to advocate for a process that is fair and transparent and that will build a long-term community partnership that is culminating in consent. We also have a unique opportunity to strongly encourage and prioritize sites such as Songs, which are no longer operational, but cannot be fully decommissioned until that spent fuel is relocated off-site. The decommissioning must be completed in order to restore the land and return it to the Department of Navy. We know that finding an interim storage facility through a consent-based process will indeed take time. And we should continue to pursue a permanent solution and a permanent repository in tandem with this process. So Supervisor Bartlett is very encouraged by the Department of Energy's progress and commitment to finding a solution to this long-standing issue. She believes that by us working together with community organizations, elected officials, residents, we can pave a path forward sooner rather than later to relocate a lot of this spent fuel off-site. So once again, thank you for your support and thank you for your participation.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your comments. I want to go now to Crystal Javara, who works with Jim Desmond in San Diego for your perspective, and then we'll pause for a moment and see if there are comments or questions from the CEP, and then get some additional perspectives. But Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And Dr. Petrie, thank you for the very informative information that you provided to us. Supervisor Desmond apologizes for not being here today. He had a conflicting appointment, so you get me instead. But I'm here as his alternate and as the co-chair of the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now Coalition and a member of the Community Engagement Panel. In Supervisor Desmond's district, which is the district where Songs is located, nearly every city has a representative that has joined the coalition, and many are working on passing resolutions of support on behalf of their constituents. This is truly a bipartisan effort, winning the unanimous support of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors and other elected officials from both sides of the aisle. Supervisor Desmond regrets that he cannot be here today, but sends his support and appreciation for the Department of Energy's leadership in restarting the federal spent fuel management program. We are particularly pleased to see the department pursue a consent-based siting process in the RFI. Looking at the lessons from our past and examples from other countries that have successfully found a solution for their spent nuclear fuel, we know that obtaining consent from the community is critical to finding a location. While siting an interim storage facility with the host community's full consent will undoubtedly be a lengthy process, this type of approach is needed to ensure fairness and buy-in from all affected stakeholders. It is also needed to ensure that members of our own community, which has been home to songs since 1968, have an opportunity to provide input, which is what the CEP has been doing successfully, so we appreciate that. We believe the process should prioritize stakeholder engagement, build understanding at the onset, and establish a low bar for participation. We also believe that sites like songs, where the presence of spent fuel prevents the shutdown plant from being fully decommissioned and restored, should be prioritized for spent fuel removal when an interim storage solution becomes available. I would respectfully urge the Department of Energy to take this type of input into consideration as the consent-based siting process begins to take shape. We look forward to submitting our comments on the RFI and are pleased to support this effort. And on behalf of Supervisor Jim Desmond, I want to thank you for your time and your leadership on this issue.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I want to first convey to Supervisors Bartlett and Desmond our thanks, and if you could pass that back to them for their ongoing support of this. I'm curious, Christian and Crystal, does the coalition, I can't pronounce the acronym, I'm sorry, I'm still stumbling, does the local coalition have a view about the RFI? I assume we're in favor of it, and we're in favor of DOE doing all the things that DOE is doing. Crystal, your comments were very clear about that. Are we planning on submitting comments? Are there particular things we want to hear back from DOE? How can we deepen the relationship in a way that advances the goal of interim storage and, of course, ultimately, as Christian said, a responsible siting for a permanent repository?
I'll go ahead and go first. On behalf of Supervisor Desmond, yes, the coalition is preparing comments, and we'll be submitting that once both of our bosses and the rest of the executive committee have had an opportunity to weigh in. I believe, and I don't want to put words in my boss's mouth, but I believe that he is very pleased with the consent-based process and the approach that the Department of Energy is taking, and very appreciative of the RFI and being able to comment. And I think lessons learned from the past and the, we don't like to say fail, but we're going to fail forward and look at some other more successful examples of how to first place an interim storage, but really know that to have successful interim storage, there must also be a plan in place for that permanent repository, and that emphasis being kept on that is truly important. So I know he would say that, Supervisor Desmond would say that, and beyond that, I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I'm sure Christian has something he would like to add.
Yeah, and Crystal's absolutely right. You know, Supervisor Bartlett views this the same way. You know, the coalition will, you know, definitely put together some comments and help responding for the RFI, but also we're looking forward to helping or you know, showing this to the community and ensuring that there's an increased support, you know, to ensure that this consent-based process can move forward. I mean, you know, we as a coalition are indeed, you know, a good part in this, but also we need the help of the communities around it as well. So that's how the supervisor views it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I want to go on John Kotek a little bit and then cycle back. Maybe I could just, it's almost baseball season, so I just do a metaphor from baseball. It seems like we've swung at the pitch of interim storage a few times and not connected. We got to find a way to connect. And so I think it's just really encouraging to see the local coalition. It's encouraging to see what DOE is doing. We've got to find a way to connect. We've got to find a way to take the private activities that are moving along on their own and have them not be competing, but complementary, if not one and the same. you can see all the pieces fitting together, but then ultimately the bat needs to connect to the ball, and that we've not yet done. So thank you both for your comments. I want to go now to John Kotek, formerly at the Department of Energy, now at the Nuclear Energy Institute, NEI, and knows this issue extremely well. And I want to invite you, John, for your comments. And then after that, I'll open up more widely to the CEP, including asking Tom Isaacs to make a few remarks. But John, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thanks, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let me skim through just a couple of framing slides before we get into the meat of the discussion, if we can go on to the next one. So just for those in the audience who might not be familiar with just what spent fuel is, what I've got here on the left is a fresh fuel assembly. On the right, you see fuel being handled in the spent fuel pool. The fuel itself doesn't change. You get between, say, 200 and 500 of these fuel rods in a reactor at any given time. When it goes into the reactor, you can handle it by hand. When it comes out, of course, it's very both physically and radioactively hot due to the creation of fission products in the fuel. On the next slide, it's not just, of course, a situation we're dealing with in California. There's spent fuel stored in the majority of the states around the country. We've heard reference made to plant sites. For example, the Trojan site in Oregon is decommissioned all but the spent fuel. Same with the Maine Yankee site in Maine. So there are a growing number of sites around the U.S. where all that's left on site is the spent fuel. But still, most of the fuel currently is at operating reactor sites. On the next slide, just a little bit in terms of the recent history, as was mentioned, the efforts to site a facility at Yucca Mountain were discontinued by the Obama administration in 2010. They established a Blue Ribbon Commission to look at the issue. I happen to serve as the staff director to that commission, and Dr. Tom Isaacs was senior advisor to the commission. And so one of the key recommendations was to establish consolidated interim storage, and that a consent-based process be used for both the storage and ultimately a repository. Some other things, important parts of recommendations there. In 2014, the NRC, and recognizing the fact that the Yucca Mountain project had been discontinued, looked at the issue of safety of long-term storage at reactor sites and concluded that fuel can, in fact, be stored safely for many decades in both pools and dry storage at reactor sites. In 2017, as Dr. Petrie mentioned, we issued an initial process, the one that DOE is seeking to update right now. This is when I was in DOE the last couple of years of the Obama administration trying to establish this program. We sought funding from Congress to begin establishment of a consent-based siting progress, and that request was rejected. Then the Trump administration came in, they halted the consent-based siting effort. They tried to resume licensing the Yucca Mountain project. That was also rejected by Congress. And so now we're back to the consent-based siting program with the issuance of the RFI, which I'll just say we as the Nuclear Energy Institute, speaking on behalf of the industry, are very supportive of the efforts to revive a consent-based siting process. We see the RFI as a real step forward. We think consolidated storage has an important role to play, both a federal facility and the private initiatives, and we encourage DOE to consider those private initiatives as it develops its approach for an integrated nuclear waste management system. On the next slide, so the current landscape is, we're seeing a lot of support in the administration and Congress in many of the U.S. states for nuclear energy. There is funding for dealing with this issue. There's something called the Nuclear Waste Fund you've probably heard about in the past. Money that's been collected from probably you folks as consumers of nuclear generated electricity now sits in a fund that the nuclear waste program does not have reliable access to. That funding needs to be appropriated and is in competition with other federal priorities. And we think that's something that needs to be fixed over the long term. But there's $44 billion sitting there that's been collected for the purpose of providing for an integrated waste management system and in particular a repository for this material. There's a lot going on with consolidated interim storage. We've, of course, heard about the RFI for the federal programs. You've heard about the private initiatives. I'll talk about those in a little bit, but that, the progress there has gotten bogged down. Congress, continues to just provide what I'd call, sort of de minimis level funding for this activity. There has been some funding appropriated. When Congress finally agrees on fiscal 22 appropriations, we'll see exactly what they've settled on. But ultimately, we're going to need to see these funding levels grow considerably. On the next slide, what you'll see is if we could turn to the next one. So just a little bit more about these consolidated interim storage facilities that have been proposed by private entities. These can serve as a very efficient way of managing used fuel while we take the time to develop a repository that will serve as the long-term resting place for this facility. Makes a lot of sense to centralize things like aging management infrastructure. It makes a lot of sense to consolidate, particularly from these shutdown plant sites. Minimizes the need for security protection, creates economic opportunity, both in the communities that might host these facilities, but also for communities that have land that's being tied up because spent fuel is stored there. It certainly is a temporary solution. We need to see ultimately a repository built, and but ultimately we have seen the private sector with communities in both southeastern New Mexico and western Texas step forward with proposals to establish these consolidated storage facilities. The one in Texas has been licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The one in New Mexico is in the NRC review process. I'll also note there was a site in Utah that was licensed by the NRC back 15 or so years ago for this purpose, but the progress on that facility was stymied. Next slide. In terms of the global context, Tom, now that Tom Isaacs is here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because he is truly the dean when it comes to this sort of thing. But I will just point out that other nations are far ahead of us, where we once led the world at sort of dealing with the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle. We've now seen other nations move far ahead of us. Finland, in particular, has a repository licensed and under construction. The Swedish government just gave permission to build their repository, and several other countries are moving forward smartly. In particular, Canada, which I'm sure Tom will speak to because he's very much involved in that process. I will note that all of these programs are following some version of a consent-based process with an adaptive phased approach. And I will also point out that France, Sweden, Switzerland have all deployed centralized interim storage. Japan plans to as well. On the next slide, one thing I think is worth emphasis in the continued focus of this group is transportation. Again, reference has been made to transportation. Where I used to work at a place called the Idaho National Laboratory, that's the place where the Navy sends its spent fuel when the submarines or aircraft carriers are defueled. That's the place where some commercial fuel, including the waste left over from the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania that had the accident back in the late 70s. Spent fuel from university research reactors is shipped to Idaho. So we have a lot of experience moving this material, but it does take time. And as Dr. Bickford pointed out, there's a lot of coordination that needs to go on. So this is one of those kind of long poles in the tent, critical path items that I think is important to focus on. So, because while it's going to be essential to get sites, of course, for storage and disposal of material, getting approval to and getting the necessary coordination in place to actually execute the transportation takes time, and I think is worthy of remaining on this group's radar. So finally, on the next slide, just a couple of thoughts. As I mentioned, the industry is very supportive of moving forward with the request for information. Very interested to hear Dr. Petrie talk about the opportunity for funding for state, tribal, and local grants for communities that want to learn more. Of course, the next step isn't to ask, who's willing. The next step is to ask who wants to learn more. I think that's a very appropriate thing for DOE to be considering next. Certainly, to reestablish an organization within DOE focused on this is very important. And I know, Dr. Petrie, Dr. Bickford and others are working on strengthening the team that they have internally. I'll just mention that for years, decades, there was a separate organization outside of the Office of Nuclear Energy where Drs. Petrie and Bickford work, called the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management, that had responsibility for the waste management program. When I was at DOE trying to stand this program up, for example, the waste program was 10% of my budget and half my time. Okay, so there's a lot of reason to have somebody that's specifically focused on this program. We think it's going to be important, ultimately to seek congressional authorization to move forward with an integrated nuclear waste management system. Again, we think it's important to allow for these private issues, and the point I made, or the private initiatives, and the point I made earlier about transportation, I won't make again. But ultimately, it's going to come down to Congress. I mean, right now, there's an impasse. And while DOE can do certain things and is trying to do certain things, at the end of the day, Congress is going to have to decide the future of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. It's going to have to provide, I think, assured access to the Nuclear Waste Fund. A point was made earlier about building confidence. One of the key steps, I think, is the government needs to be able to start making and keeping commitments, right? And having assured access to funding is one way of doing that, making sure you can deliver. So we think that's going to be an important part. So with that, let me end my remarks. Thank you all for the opportunity, and happy to take questions or turn it over to Dr. Isaacs, however you see fit.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I want to take a moment so we can ask you some questions while I'm waiting to see whether other members of the CP want the floor. Let me just quickly ask you a couple. One of them is, what's different this time? When you were in the Blue Ribbon Commission and doing consent before, it seems like the ideas are very similar, at least they're rhyming. And it's something really different this time, politically, technologically. And related, how far can this whole process go without some answer to Yucca or son of Yucca or daughter of Yucca? Because it seems like Yucca's a nightmare, and we're not going to fix that nightmare quickly. We're not going to, get the government to be able to make credible commitments on everything quickly. So how far can we go without that?
So I'll take your second question first. How far can you go? Frankly, that's open to interpretation. When I was at DOE, we felt like we could engage in conversations with communities, but you couldn't actually start doing site-specific, or certainly start with the development of a site. I don't know if DOE's position on that has changed, so I think that's something that's maybe Dr. Petrie would want to take on either now or in the future. I don't know where DOE is in sort of thinking about that, with their new team. In terms of what's different, one thing is different is that there's a lot more support for nuclear and recognition of the value of the technology as we drive towards an increasingly decarbonized energy system. What we're seeing with utilities that operate nuclear power plants, for example, is, as they make commitments to get near or even all the way to 100% carbon free, they're realizing that they can build a lot more wind and solar, and they can build storage, but having something that's 24/7 firm and carbon free helps you keep reliability up and cost down for your consumers. And so with that, it's got companies planning on running their nuclear plants longer than maybe they otherwise would have. And two, it's got more and more starting to look at, okay, what would a next wave of nuclear energy deployments look like? Folks may have seen the Tennessee Valley Authority, for example, announced a couple of hours ago, their advanced nuclear program. It's not a commitment to go build, but it's a commitment to take the next step in the analysis of new nuclear to help as they shut down coal plants. And so that I think has helped elevate this issue in Congress and with the sort of the broader nuclear community in a way to get people focused on the fact that to move forward, and achieve all that I think we can with the next generation of nuclear, we need a credible program for the management of spent nuclear fuel. And so I think that's injecting a little more energy into the debate over this issue. But my boss testified on in front of the Senate EPW yesterday on a bill related to spent fuel, for example. And so the people are talking more about it.
Okay, thanks. And I would just underscore your point about clean, firm power. My lab does a lot of modeling in this area. It's a very clear result from the electricity power flow models. I think we're going to go to Martha McNicholas, and then let me just say, anyone else from the CEP who wants the floor, just take your microphone, open your microphone, and also want to invite Erica Bickford and Kim Petrie, if you want to say anything in response to what John Kotek and others have said, to just turn on your camera, and then I'll see you and get you into the sequence. But right now, the floor is yours, Martha.
Hi, Martha McNicholas. I'm on the CEP and I'm a president of the school board here locally in Southern Orange County. I'm noticing on your map of where spent fuel is stored, I don't see anything in Utah, and I thought there were some nuclear waste storage facilities or opportunities in Utah.
Yeah. There's a low level waste, and this is just commercial fuel. So for example, there might be university spent fuel in some of the states that aren't shown here. What you have in Utah is you have what they call a low level waste disposal facility out west of Salt Lake. So that might be what you're thinking of, but there isn't spent fuel stored or disposed there.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
And that, just to close the loop here, that's the facility that I visited. I think it was last summer. It was like 6,000 degrees outside. And that's where much of the material, the lower level material from the San Onofre site is going. John Taylor, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. As a city council member from San Juan Capistrano, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this RFI and how does it get communicated to the United States? Does it go to just rural communities that could handle this? And then would a city council get some kind of information that, an RFI is opened up and then they would address this? I'm just trying to look at how does this practically work?
Yeah. Maybe I could put that question back to Kim Petrie. John, did you want to say something about it before we go to Kim?
No, I'm probably going to say the same thing. I could guess at what Kim's doing, but Kim can tell you what she's doing. So go ahead, Kim.
Okay, so the RFI is really just to help us figure out part of the RFI is to help us figure out what consent actually means. So there are lots of different definitions of consent, and so we're trying to, in part, work with all communities on what that really means through the local community, the counties, the states, the tribal nations. It's not clearly defined yet. We're still working towards figuring that out, and we are hoping to get feedback on that in the RFI. The RFI, when it closes, those comments will be used to help us figure out how to engage with communities in this funding opportunity announcement that we expect to announce later this year. And the process hasn't really been formalized yet because we're still in the middle of developing it, essentially. I'll defer to anybody else on my team who may want to add more to that.
And while folks are thinking about it, I'll just add one other thing that I'm fairly confident has happened. There are groups like the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National League of Cities, the National Association of Counties, the NARUC, which is the Public Utility Commissioners. I know there's been an effort to push this information out to those folks as well, so they can then ensure that their membership is aware. So I know there's a pretty concerted effort to use those types of groups as a force multiplier, as it were, if that helps.
Yeah, but I do think maybe part of what Taylor is saying is we need to also have an even deeper turning of the spade on how to get the message out to the communities. It looks like Elisa Trunzo from DOE would like to comment on this. Then I'm going to go after Elisa back to the CEP. Elisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, John, you and David both took the first part of what I was going to say, so thanks a lot on that. No, that was great. So we are engaging with the groups that John mentioned, but David, you're absolutely right that we need to go deeper. And part of the work that we've been doing is ensuring that we incorporate a lot of the work that's been going on in the past several years in environmental justice, equity. There's been a lot of work also in social sciences and behavioral psychology that we're both incorporating into our team so that we get that expertise, but also that we're sharing the information out to those organizations and some of the work that they've already done in the communities of practice that they've built in that space. We're sharing the RFI with them in the hopes that they will engage very closely on this. And then, as Kim mentioned, the RFI is the first step, and one of the questions in the RFI is about, or several of the questions are in the area of removing barriers to participation in this process. So we're hoping to get feedback, especially from people like you who are, have a wonderful perspective and hopefully can guide us the places that we need to go next. So how do we do a better job of communicating, of getting the word out as we start to look to work with communities? And we're really planning to incorporate that feedback into the next steps that we plan for our stakeholder engagement, for the public participation parts of our process. So we're continuing to iterate and do better.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And I'm hearing lots of encouragement for folks to contribute comments to the RFI, and certainly in my takeaways from today's meeting that will circulate to the CEP within 24 hours. I'm going to emphasize that along with the contact information. So I want to go to Rob Howard, then I'm going to bring in Tom Isaacs on this discussion. But I'm going to ask Tom a question before he makes his comments. But right now to you, Rob Howard.
Hi, I'm Rob Howard. The other Rob Howard on the station. Not quite as handsome as my brother, Rob Howard, but actually, I don't need to say anything because Trunzo just said it all. So thanks, Trunzo.
Okay. With the other Rob Howard, please stand.
Well, I would disagree.
Remember that game show?
I'll disagree with the handsome decision. I think you got me on that one. I'll let you roll with that. But John, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing up the issue of base load. I'm spending time with a number of the community choice energy groups around that area, and they're starting to move in the renewable space. But yet, what I see are new people to the energy piece without any real understanding of the infrastructure that's necessary to keep the grid stable. So I would hope that you would keep pushing that forward. But for me, out of all this discussion, I still come back to this. We get consent from an area. They're ready to go. They've done everything they need to do, and yet the science isn't the issue. It's the politics. How is this going to work if I get consent? Will that consent have to be from the local and the state in agreement? Or, I mean, and I don't know, it may not be you to answer that, and we may not have the answer, but I still see that as a challenge, because at the end of the day, you can put it right next door to me, but if the state says, no, you can't have it, then it's not going to happen. How do we get to the next level in order to make this happen?
And your answer cannot include modification of the Constitution. John?
That is an outstanding lead-in, actually, to Tom Isaacs' discussion. It's an issue that the Blue Ribbon Commission certainly wrestled with. If you look at the report of the Blue Ribbon Commission, it didn't try to define it. And I think that it was Dr. Petrie who said, they expect it to look different in different places. And just to give you a couple of examples, if you look at the history of how the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico came into being versus how the state of Idaho and the federal government reached agreement on, they call the settlement agreement, which allowed DOE and the Navy to resume shipping spent fuel into the state of Idaho for storage. There couldn't be more different in the way those two things happen. Yet they both got to a place where a facility was allowed to either open or continue operating. And so at this point in the process, I think it's difficult to say exactly what that's going to look like. Tom Isaacs has some great examples of how it has worked and some considerations that I think have been important in the process that other countries have followed. So I don't know, Tom, you want to use that as a jumping off point for your remarks?
Yeah, so let me just, as we're going to Tom, I think that'll be tremendously helpful now for us to hear from Tom. Let me sharpen the question just an extra notch here, because I think what John's saying is there's no playbook, but there are force fields. There are ways of making the politics better. I'm just curious, Tom Isaacs, you've heard what Kim Petrie and others have said as the new DOE effort and the effort to learn what consent is, and then there's a follow-on to invite communities for federal facilities and so on. When you look at that, and you look at what we've learned in Finland and Sweden and now in Canada and other places that are actually doing it, are we becoming like Finland, and is that a good thing? Or are we not finished enough? Are we not doing the right things to get us to the point where we could actually have communities want to host these facilities and have their host states also want to do that as well? Tom?
Wow, that's a lot to deal with. So what I was asked to do was to give some reflections on what I heard to date. So let me do that, and I will try to answer David's question and the good-looking Rob Howard's question along the way. And if I miss something, feel free to inject. Let me start by saying that John Kotek was a masterful staff director for the Blue Ribbon Commission. I had the pleasure of working closely with John. And John, a couple weeks ago, mentioned that it was the 10th anniversary of the publication of the Blue Ribbon Commission report. And I simultaneously had two reactions. One was, wow, that's pretty cool. It's been 10 years and people are still looking at the Blue Ribbon Commission report as the go-to document for figuring out how to solve this problem in the U.S. And simultaneously, I was saying, boy, that's somewhat disappointing that after 10 years, they're still looking to the Blue Ribbon Commission report as a way of trying to figure out how to move forward. One of the things that we said in the Blue Ribbon Commission report, and I can almost quote it exactly, is we know what we have to do, we know we have to do it, and we even know how to do it. That was in the summary of the report, and yet here we are 10 years later and struggling with some of the same issues that many of you have very well characterized in the discussion so far. I want to start by giving a little perspective. We had two co-chairs for the Blue Ribbon Commission. One was a very distinguished Republican, General Brent Scowcroft, who had been the National Security Advisor to two Republican presidents. The other was a distinguished Democrat, Lee Hamilton, a 17-term congressman from Indiana and the vice chair of the 9/11 Commission. And just 10 years ago, people were working extremely collaboratively in that study. I think John would agree with me that there was never any daylight between the views of those gentlemen and the 16 commissioners that were on the Blue Ribbon Commission. It's a much harder pull now than it was then politically, and it was hard then. Secondly, I'd like to mention that it was the commissioners themselves, the co-chairs themselves, who said, of the 8 recommendations in the Blue Ribbon Commission, we want you to make consent-based citing the first one, that it was the foundation for the hopes of success of a program like this, that we needed to move forward in a way where, what does it mean to be consent? It means that you have a community that presumably is informed and willing to host such a facility. And so that was the first recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Commission. What does it mean to get the public trust and confidence to allow that to happen? You know, when I was in the Department of Energy before the Blue Ribbon Commission, I ran the international program for about a decade. And so I had the occasion to go to places like Finland and Sweden. And as David Victor mentioned, I've been working with the Canadians for almost 20 years now on this issue. And when I came back from Sweden, I actually sat down and wrote a paper, because I came back and I told my colleagues, I said, you know something, they're smarter than we are. And everybody, of course, was upset. And what I meant by that was they understood that we had science and technologies that was the equal or better of any country in the world. But when it came to the engagement part of this, building public trust and confidence, we didn't have the approach in this country that was likely to lead there. And what I saw were three very simple things. One, they understood that if somebody's going to trust you, it's the same reason they trust their barber or their doctor or anybody else. First of all, they believe that the party is competent and has a track record of competence in doing the job that's necessary. Secondly, and every bit as important, you have confidence when you believe the party that's doing the decision-making has your best interests at heart when they make decisions. It's not simply, we want to win and we'll ameliorate your downside. It's, we're going to do this in a way that you'll be better off. We want to make you better off for having been part of this process, even if you don't wind up volunteering. And then the third one, and we've heard a lot of this today, is that you listen and respond. And by responding, it doesn't mean you say, well, look, I understand this better than you, so listen to me. I'm the scientist. I'm the expert. It means if you're concerned, I'm concerned. How do we work together to fix this? That's the key, I believe, in a nutshell, to why things work in Finland and Sweden. And they are working, hopefully, in Canada right now. But there is one big kicker in the United States that you don't see in Finland and Sweden and Canada, and it was mentioned by the good-looking Rob Howard, and that's they don't have the equivalent of state government in those places. The provincial government in Canada doesn't play the same role at all. In Finland and Sweden, they don't have it. And that is the major challenge, and as John Kotek reflected, that's a hard one. How did they do it at WIP? I try to explain to people it's kind of like the stars align, and what you've got to do is work toward an opportunity where there's a win-win-win situation. And the way I believe that's going to happen is not simply from the federal government down giving money or benefits to a community. It's from the community up as well, talking to their state government and the regional cities around them and saying, look, this is in our best interest. We realize that this is something that is of some concern. We have to work together because we in this local community see this as part of our future. It's important to us in that regard. The last comments I'll make about this, I could obviously spend more time, but I don't want to, is DOE is in a tough situation. You all recognize that. I lived it, and the folks are living it there now, and David Victor did a good job of describing it, and as did John Kotek. The DOE is part of an administration. The DOE has to work closely with the Congress. There are elections that happen routinely, and parties change and politics change, and often when the most important decisions are made, they wind up being made on short-term political basis, not on long-term program stability basis. It's very hard for any federal agency to operate in that regard, and that's exacerbated by the fact that there's a budget process where budgets are allocated annually. And so, as John Kotek said, unless you can get to the place where the organization responsible can make and keep commitments, if you're on the receiving end of it, if you're the one considering whether or not to be a host, it's pretty hard to say, I'm going to reach an agreement with this party if they may not be responsible 2 years later, or they may not have the budget to follow through on their promises. And the last thing I'll say, and this has been mentioned too, this goes back to my point about everything, we know what we have to do and we know we have to do it. It's unlikely for a program like this to be successful unless there's a vibrant, successful program moving toward a repository. It's interim storage for a reason. There are a lot of benefits to interim storage, a lot of benefits beyond the ones that have been mentioned now, but interim means it's for a period of time and then it's not anymore. And there's got to be a parallel commitment and focus on eventually having a repository. The Finns are in the process now. They are in the home stretch of opening a repository for the disposal of spent fuel. The Swedes just had a major governmental decision to move forward with their repository. I chair something called the Site Selection Review Group in Canada for the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. They're down to 2 sites. I might mention in the questions of consent that the 2 communities who are the finalists have chosen different methods for determining and describing their consent. in the process. So recognizing there's more than one way to reach consent in a community is important as you go forward. But we hope that these examples in places like Finland, Sweden, and hopefully Canada are going to lead shortly to the existence proof that we can solve this kind of a problem, and that hopefully we'll put together a program that's sustainable, that's stable, that's flexible, that's well-intentioned to move forward. The foundation has got to be consent-based siting, so I applaud DOE and others of us who are trying hard to make that happen. And I'll stop there, David, and take any comments.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. So just we have a few minutes here. I want to see if there are more questions or comments for the CEP before we go to a break. And I want to just pick up on something you said. What I heard you say, Tom, is that the win-win-win needs to come from inside these communities. Probably can't predict this, but you can raise the odds that the win-win-win will all come together. That seems like a very important set of insights. I want to just ask a question to John, to both first to Kim Petrie and then to John Kotek, and then I'm going to go to Ted Quinn for commentary. But maybe first to you, Kim Petrie. The John called the funding that's available de minimis, and you guys are doing, the consultation process. You're going to line up communities for federal program and so on. How long can you run with the current arrangements and current appropriations before you need something bigger or different? And the reason I ask that question is because I think the local coalition is trying to figure out where can we be helpful, and we can be helpful in building support and getting folks organized and reaching out to other communities. But we also need an ask, and part of the ask is back to Congress. And I know you can't say to us, ask Congress for this. That's not how our government works. But I'm curious as to how. Last time I checked, that's not how it works. I'm curious, though, as to how far you can run with the current program before you need something new. And then I'm going to ask a question to John about political change.
Thanks, David. So Congress has appropriated the same amount in the last 2 years for this activity. And we expect that at some point in the future, we will need more than what we currently have in order to seriously implement a consent-based siting effort for an interim storage facility. And I think Congress and the federal government, everyone understands that. That's not really up for debate. If we want to be serious about it, we'll have to put more money towards it. There's no way around that. Given the funding that Congress has appropriated us, we believe we can make great progress on establishing the process for consent-based siting, establishing this funding opportunity, maybe more than one phase of funding. There's a lot that we can do given the resources that we have at our disposal already. And beyond that, since this is an evolving process and we're trying to be flexible and adaptive, it would be silly of me to put limits on it because we just don't really know yet. But we can make really good progress given the resources we already have.
Okay, so it sounds like we can run also for a couple of years with the current line of sight. So John Kotek, let me ask you a question that I can't ask a sitting official of the Department of Energy, but I can ask you, which is about political change. Tom Isaacs talked about this. We had a program under Obama, then we had something going on during the Trump administration. Now we've got a program under the Biden administration. Last time I checked, the government may change. And so I'm just curious, how confident, as you look at this from the industry's perspective, you're not sitting in NEI, how much of this continues if we have political change even in the White House? And is there something we can do to raise the odds that all the good work that Kim Petrie and Eric Bickford and others have been doing, that the work continues?
Yeah, so great question. First, let me offer a thought on the question about funding. DOE is working with several tens of millions of dollars right now for this program. Back at its peak, the annual appropriations for what was then called the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management in the mid-2000s was on the order of $500 million. Tom can let me know if I'm in the ballpark. Yeah. So that gives you a sense of kind of where things need to go versus where they are now. In terms of the political question, so when I was in DOE, I always thought it was really important to start to get this question sort of into the communities, the states, the tribal governments to the extent that they were interested. And, if there were conversations going on, in communities around the country that really looked like they were, they were going somewhere, that was the sort of signal to Congress that I think could provide some durability to the program. That the challenge, of course, will be, let's assume DOE does request some funding in there. So DOE's request to Congress should be issued in the next month or so for next fiscal year. That will be a real indicator. I wouldn't be surprised to see them, requesting significant funding to get out to the states, tribes, and local governments to begin these conversations. That to me will be a real indicator of congressional support. Does Congress go along with that and allow DOE to start putting those types of grants out? So I'm going to be looking to those sorts of things to see whether it can be different this time or whether things will change with the next election. And I do think, having some durability to the program, both in terms of the management and the approach that's taken, is going to be really important ultimately to getting, to a successful solution and building the type of confidence we need.
Excellent. Thank you. Last question to Ted Quinn before we take a break. Ted Quinn, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to thank each of the speakers. And number one, I think the recognition that goes to each of the speakers, Dr. Petrie and our others, is that it is to put you all, this task force, put them all on the same panel, which is tremendous for all of us and unprecedented in some areas that I've seen. And each of the speakers declared what I consider ownership of the issue, which is a comfort to the people in the local community like ours. My question is to Tom about lessons learned from Canada. It has to do with either the agreement with local, are there lessons learned from, you said you had proceeded to 2 agreements down the process, and are there elements of that agreement that could benefit us?
Tom?
You want me to respond to?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there are, Ted, in the sense that the responsible organization in Canada is called the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, NWMO. And NWMO undertook a consent-based siting approach to this and looked for volunteers for communities, first to simply learn about the program and later to see if they wanted to express interest. And they originally had 22 communities express interest in learning more. They, from the beginning, said that they would only go to a community that was an informed and willing host. But when asked what it meant for them to be informed and mostly willing, that is to consent to being a host, what NWMO said was, we want the community to determine how they will achieve consent, but we, the NWMO, will require a compelling demonstration of consent in some fashion. So that allowed the learning process, the deliberation process to go on. The 22 sites were narrowed sequentially over time to the final 2 sites based, one, on their promise to safely dispose of waste, because this is a repository we're talking about in Canada, not an interim storage facility. There's nothing more important than demonstrating the long-term safety of isolating the waste here. So that was one thing. And then the second one was that the community determined themselves through discussions in the community as to how they're going to demonstrate this consent. That continues on as we speak. Canada has said they would like to make a final determination of the host site by the end of 2023, which isn't that far away. One of the communities has said they will do that through a referendum, essentially a popular vote of the local people. The other community came up and said, we want our elected city council to make that decision, but there will be an election of the city council between now and when they make that determination. So it will be a different process. So I think we learned that there's virtue in flexibility here. There's, John Wooden, the famous UCLA coach, said, be quick, but don't rush. And that, I think, is the hallmark of a program like the Canadian program. You've got to move forward quickly, but you've got to do it at a pace that brings these communities along with them. And I think that's what NWMO has attempted to do. It's kind of what the Scandinavians, the Finns and the Swedes have done. And I think there's probably lessons to be learned there in how the U.S. would approach this as well. I don't know if that answers your question, Ted, but that's...
It really does. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists, Kim Petrie, John Kotek, two representatives from the Orange County and San Diego County, and the supervisors have been so supportive of this whole process, and you, Tom Isaacs, and also thank the CEP. This has been a terrific conversation for about an hour and a half. It's 1:40 right now. What we're going to do is we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back for public comment. I see 11 people who want the floor for public comment, beginning with Jim Leach. If you want to get on the list, just follow the link that's in that's in the chat there. I really think there's a lot we can learn from other countries, and I hope, just to pick up on what Tom said at the end there, when we talk about consent, we focus a lot on the process of how you get consent. We also probably need to pay a closer attention to how we know we've actually gotten consent, and that's going to depend on the local community and how they express political will and engagement, and that's going to vary community by community. So let's take a 5-minute break. We'll be back in 5 minutes for the public comment period. Thank you. Manuel, should we resume? Okay. We're now in the public comment section of the meeting. I have on the list here Jim Leach and Haney Hong, and I'll keep going down the list from there. But first, if we could get Jim Leach with a microphone that works. Manuel, can you tell me what's going on here? I see the last digits are 04, has the capacity to unmute, but that's not Jim Leach.
Okay, let me go check, David, on unmuting Jim Leach.
Apologies.
Not seeing Jim Leach. Want to move to the next speaker? Or?
So the list resorted itself for reasons that are mysterious, but my baseline for mysterious has been adjusted by the pandemic. So we're going to go to Haney Hong. Yes, who's that there?
Yeah, I don't see Haney Hong either. Can he raise his hand? See if we can see him, because he might be in the bottom list where it's not visible.
Haney dropped off, I know that, but not sure about Jim Leach.
Let's do the following. If you're waiting to speak, why don't you raise your hand, and then we can at least see you, because it'll move you to the top of the Teams list. Because right now Teams is being very un-team-like. Then I'm going to work from there. We're going to give the floor first to Jennifer Ward and then to Alice McNally, and then I'm going to figure out our list from there. But first to you, Jennifer Ward, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jennifer Ward, and I am Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Government Relations for the Orange County Business Council, and we represent about 200 large businesses, academic institutions, nonprofits here in Orange County. So just appreciate the time and information that was shared during the presentation, especially the great information shared by Dr. Petrie from the Department of Energy. And we in the business community also appreciate and want to thank the team at Southern California Edison and Songs for continuing to pursue a long-term solution for the spent fuel currently being stored on our coastline. You know, this issue, we've heard a lot how it impacts the community and the environment, but it's a business issue as well, and impacts our businesses here that make up Orange County's strong global economy. So we, like has been said already today, appreciate the benefits we've experienced from clean nuclear power, but the disposal of the spent fuel should not be passed on to that next generation. So great to see the increased attention on this issue, both here locally and also with the Department of Energy. So we look forward to continuing to see work towards solutions for moving the spent fuel from our community, and happy to partner with you in any way possible. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your comment. We're going to go to Alice McNally and then to Jim Leach. But right now, Alice McNally, the floor is yours. I think your microphone is it open? Can we?
Is it open?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Good afternoon. This is Alice McNally from Del Mar. Moving the waste is not so simple. There is no place to move it. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act prevents moving it to a temporary location, a CIS, unless a permanent repository is opened, which it is not. It has to be opened and operating. Songs canisters are temporary and not transportable and will need to be repackaged before they can be moved. This current decommissioning phase will remove the cooling pools, presently our only defense in case of a leak or rupture of the canisters. This explains the urgency for a hot cell, a dry transfer facility to be built on site, designed to allow the utility to transfer fuel from loaded storage canisters to transportable casks without returning it to the cooling pools, safely securing the waste until it is ready to move. The NAS has warned that a hot cell is necessary, and Doug Bowder has stated that a hot cell might be needed at some point. When, if not now? This is not an overnight process and much must be first funded, permitted, and constructed. Your claims of too expensive, unnecessary, and that sea level rise, an earthquake, tsunami, or human error are non-events, ring hollow, and are simply not true. Your job is to keep the waste safe and until it can be safely moved. You better get busy. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Alice McNally. Next, we're going to hear from former CEP member Jim Leach. And then after Jim Leach, we're going to hear from Kathy Iwane. But Jim Leach, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Leach. I live in Rancho Santa Margarita, and I did have the privilege of serving on the community engagement panel for several years. So I'm delighted to provide comments and support the panel's continuing efforts to address the spent fuel storage at the San Onofre site. While I was on the panel, I learned a lot about innovations for transporting nuclear fuel safely. And evidently we have the technology. The question was always transport to where? And that's always been the question. No one has ever thought the current storage situation is optimal. Virtually all the citizens in my memory who came forward over the years to share their concerns have, in the final analysis, wanted to see the spent fuel go somewhere. We learned that it was a clear responsibility and commitment of the federal government to provide storage facilities for spent fuel from facilities all over the country, and somehow that facility just never materialized. Many people who expressed concern did so on behalf of the environment. The idea was it'd be best to relocate spent nuclear fuel from our coast to some facility that would pose less risk to people, property, and the environment. It sort of goes without saying, but there it is. It's crucially important that the fuel go, and I don't have to tell you that. It's good to know that positive steps are being taken for this in a number of areas. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the issue of the cost of the current storage setup both here and elsewhere. I understand it costs about $2 million a day paid by all American taxpayers because of the government's failure to establish a long-term permanent storage facility. It's clear to me that much of the success of moving this process forward is attributable to your efforts on the CEP. I applaud you for the work you've done and continue to do on behalf of all the communities in our region, and I encourage you to continue. You're making positive progress. It's been a long and slow journey, but your patience and perseverance will pay off, and we'll all be the better for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Jim Leach, for your comment. We're going to go to Kathy Iwane next, and then it's going to be Mary Beth Brangen, although I don't see Mary Beth Brangen on the list of participants. So Mary Beth, if you're with us, if you could raise your hand on the app, and if not, we'll get you into the meeting if you're still on the line. But right now, Kathy Iwane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Fantastic. Once again, I'm Kathy Iwane. I really appreciate this conversation today. I am a founding member of the Coalition for Nuclear Safety based in Del Mar, California, and a resident close enough to San Onofre to be worried about the situation as it stands now. Seeing as this is a community engagement panel primarily operated and held by Edison, I would like to, and I really appreciate what the DOE is trying to do, but I'd like us to look at the members participating on today's call. I appreciate the call for understanding this RFI for consent-based siting. I'd like us to look, if all entities involved today were really concerned about consent-based siting, we would look around at the members and we would invite leaders of tribal nations that come to the table on this, leaders of marginalized communities where inevitably this waste will be or may be cited. Second of all, I don't think it's fair to have these people, half of them cannot speak the language, half of them cannot speak for themselves, even on internet, to be able to say, you know, hey, here's what I want. I need to look at the Federal Register to figure out how to register my comments. You know, this needs to be well thought out. Second of all, the conversation has conveniently been about moving the waste. We hosted Representative Levin last week in a Q&A session. I asked him point blank, what are the benefits for receiving this waste? His staff said, well, we're researching this. And it feels like right now, with no one at the table to have a voice, there's a lot of researching going on without attending to the main topic. Let's keep the waste safe while it's on site. Unfortunately, Edison nor the NRC will entertain any conversation of outlier events like earthquake, all of these, tsunami, etc. Information is being scrubbed on NRC website. Also, we have a FOIA request to find information that was submitted to the NRC in 2013 about this site being a bad site for a waste site. I'd like us all to look around, and I support Ali's comments. Let's have the waste be as safe as possible. The 73 canisters are vertically positioned below grade. There's been no research on flood after 32 hours. Let's get a dry transfer facility and get us in a safe position to someday safely transport this waste off-site. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment, Kathy Awane. And next is Mary Beth Brangen, if you are with us. I'm not seeing you right now, so we're going to go to Diki Yiwo. Maybe you can help me pronounce your name properly. But Mary Beth, are you? I don't see Mary Beth with us. So DK or can you please help me pronounce your name properly? And then the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is DK Yiwo, calling in today on behalf of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce to discuss the need to remove the spent fuel from songs by siting an off-site storage facility. We greatly appreciate Dr. Petrie and the Department of Energy for taking the time to participate in today's panel discussion. The Chamber supports the release of the Department's request for information to seek input and work towards a consent-based siting process. As a member of the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now coalition, we are encouraged to see the momentum gathering in the effort to answer this problem. On behalf of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce and the wider business community, we appreciate everyone's efforts here today. We do plan to remain engaged and look forward to continuing to work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment, Deacon Anio. And next we're going to have Patrick Batten and then Darrell Gale. I don't see Patrick on the list, on the attendees list. So unless your hand goes up, I'll come back to the folks who we've called who are not here for various reasons. I appreciate everyone's patience with the technology. Darrell Gale and then Nina Babiar is Darrell Gale.
Patrick's on now.
Oh, Patrick, excellent. So Patrick Batten, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to speak. My name is Patrick Batten, and I'm here on behalf of the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now coalition. As many of you are aware, our goal is to encourage the federal government to provide off-site storage or permanent disposal solutions for the spent nuclear fuel at SONGS, as well as other nuclear sites across the state and nation. The coalition enjoys bipartisan support across the region and has been engaged in meaningful discussions with key stakeholders regarding the best approach to restart the federal spent fuel management program and ultimately the removal of the spent fuel from our coastline. While it's been more than 2 decades since the federal government was required by law to begin picking up and disposing of the spent fuel, we feel that there is now new momentum toward a solution. With the unprecedented support that is growing, we see that this window of opportunity has become more evident with the Department of Energy's release of their request for information to begin the process for a consent-based siting of federal centralized or consolidated interim storage of commercial spent fuel nuclear fuel. So on behalf of the coalition, I want to thank the Department of Energy for their effort in solving this critical need to provide a storage facility. And we appreciate your efforts for looking to and look forward to responding in writing to the RFI and remaining engaged in the ongoing conversations. I would like the opportunity, if possible, to ask Dr. Petrie one question, and it's surrounding the issue of consolidated interim storage facilities being directly linked to the siting of a permanent repository. And my question is just to kind of gauge the Department of Energy's thoughts, necessity for federal legislation on what it would take to loosen that linkage to the site for consolidated interim storage. I'd appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we're going to get back to answers to those questions. We'll make sure that Dan Stetson and Martha McNicholas run the moderated discussion at the end of the public comments. We get answers to that and many other questions. Next is going to be Darrell Gale and then Nina Babiars, but Darrell Gale is first. I'm not sure that I saw either Darrell's telephone number, which I have here, the last digits, or her name. Why don't we go to Nina Babiars and then Colleen Walker, and we'll come back to Darrell Gale. Nina Babiars, the floor is yours. Let's see. I don't see Nina Babiars.
In the list, right?
Is Nina on the list here?
No, she can raise her hand if she's
Okay,
on
we'll
the-
come back to Nina Babiars, and I did see Charles Langley, with whom she works, on the list here, so maybe it could be done through Charles's line if they want the floor, or separately. But let's go to Colleen Walker, and then we'll cycle back and see if other folks are here and would like the floor. Colleen Walker, the floor is yours. Okay, there we go. Let's go to Darrell Gale. Darrell, I see your hand up. Let's get your microphone on and get your comment now. You should be able to unmute your microphone now, Darrell.
Now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. My comments, thank you for having this opportunity. My comments are usually here for Edison. So this is mainly for Edison to consider this. Edison, we need a bigger and higher wall because the community around San Onofre doesn't want illegal plutonium ions swimming across the ocean and entering our beaches from Fukushima. And the same goes for cesium and strontium. No sneaking onto our coast. Stay in Japan. You're not wanted here in California. And Edison, while you're at it, keep the cooling pools or get us a hot cell so that we can safely repackage all this vile, highly toxic material for 600,000 years from their flimsy, untransportable canisters to wherever and whenever we decide to send it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Excellent. Darrell Gale, thank you very much for your comment. We're going to go now back to Nina Babiars and Colleen Walker, if Nina or Colleen are with us. And if anyone has had their hand, would like the floor, and has not had the floor, also raise your hand. It'll make us easier for us to open the microphone. I'm not seeing either Colleen Walker or Nina Babiars. Let's go back to Nancy Hong and then Mary Beth Brangan. And then I want to ask maybe Manuel if you could step in and let me know if there's anybody who's signed up to speak who hasn't had a few opportunities to get their microphone turned on. I really want to make this as easy as possible. Nancy Hong or Mary Beth Brangan. Okay, Manuel, can I ask you, is there anybody else on the list who's asked to speak that I've missed?
Checking now. No, I think we have some written questions that or comments that may merit a response, but I think you got everybody at this stage, or at least you've tried to call on everybody at this stage.
Okay, well, along the way, let's begin some answers. Along the way, if you realize you want to the floor, raise your hand and we'll get you in for your comments or questions. I'm going to, and several people wrote in advance with questions but didn't want to say them speak. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Martha and to Dan to lead the facilitated discussion with our guests, including with Edison, because I know several of the questions were directed at Edison. Martha and Dan?
Thank you, David. Martha, would you like to begin?
Sure. There were, excuse me, there were several people who mentioned and a couple that wrote in about the transportability of the current canisters and about the need for a hot cell. So I think there are several people that mentioned that. And I think is Jerry Stevenson online to answer that?
Yeah, I'm here. So I'm not sure where the transportability comment's coming from. Our canisters are licensed to transport. Many of them are ready for transport now. There's transport technology available to transport casks, transport cars. We just need a place to send them. So, given the lack of a need to repackage them, there's no plan to repackage any of our spent fuel canisters. They're going to be shipped to their final destination, wherever that may end up in their current canisters. And as soon as we have a place, which is the topic of the CEP, we'll be ready to ship them.
Thank you. I think that covers several of our questioners. Dan, you want to take the next one?
Well, let me just add on to that a little bit, if I may. So Alice McNally, she commented that the canisters are currently are non-transportable and they must be repackaged. So could you expound on that a little bit? That they are, I believe you said don't need to be repackaged and they're ready to roll. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. They're currently stored in a transportable configuration, fully licensed for a Part 71 license to be transported when a facility becomes available. We have everything we need to transport them. A few of them either need a little more time, or they need a little more engineering analysis. And if a place becomes available before the time has passed, we will do that engineering analysis. But we're everything that we need to transport the canisters is available at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read a comment and a question from Marilyn Fuss, and I'll look to you to help me who to best ask the question to. I visited the meetings of the SONGS community from Los Angeles on quite a few occasions over the past 7 years, and so it seems to me that the community engagement panel then and now needs to be more engaged and concerned that the canisters storing nuclear waste are time bombs whose hours are running out because they are made of 5/8-inch thick steel, which was never sufficient for the Herculean job of holding in deadly and potentially explosive materials. Securing and reinforcing each and every one of these canisters must be the first order of business, and immediately before any of them are moved. They are simply not safe to relocate until then. How many seasons will it take to realize and act upon this potential disaster? Sincerely, Marilyn Fuss. I think Edison has addressed this a number of times. Dr. Petrie, maybe you might like to add a little bit and comment on that, on those comments and question.
I'm going to, hi everybody. I'm going to pitch this one to Rob Howard from Pacific Northwest National Lab. He's one of our technical experts who can give you all the details on this one.
Okay. Would the other Rob Howard at least stand out?
All right. Yeah, this is Rob Howard from Pacific Northwest National Labs. I'm the National Technical Director of the Integrated Waste Management Program supporting Dr. Petrie. The canisters at SONGS and quite honestly every other spent fuel storage site in the country have been licensed and certified by the NRC. There are rigorous safety analyses that are performed before these canisters can get loaded. There are inspection programs and protocols in place. So, and the material is not explosive. So, there are safety measures in place to address the issues that have been brought up.
Dan, before you go, Doug, did you want to comment on this? And then I want to, before we go to more questions, I want to bring in the last couple of public comments. But Doug, did you want to comment directly on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I fundamentally agree with what's been said. We've also covered for our canister technology, the design of the system, the inspections that we do on it, even the robotics that we've developed to continue to stay ahead of the curve on where we are with our canisters. And clearly the canisters themselves have a service life of beyond 100 years. We've already now inspected both systems. We recently inspected the horizontal storage system, the New Homes or TN system, and those canisters look great. We found no reason to be worried about anything. They look like the day they were when they were originally stored about 20 years ago into the system. So the idea about explosivity really doesn't match how they're designed. The fuel pellets are in uranium dioxide pellets themselves inside fuel rods that are it's a very stable environment. And the one mechanism we have talked about publicly that is chloride stress corrosion cracking, which in theory could occur with a stainless steel design. We've got ways to detect it if it does start. We've got design in the canister systems themselves, our selection of stainless steel, 316L steel, as well as how the canisters are put together, and an extra thickness on the walls for hours of 1/8 of an inch. Actually puts us ahead of the industry a bit there. But as is mentioned, there's over 3,000 of these canisters around the country, and they're all generally shippable, and they're all regulated under Part 72 and Part 71, as Jerry mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to go back and get I see two more public comments that we were not able to get previously. I also want to underscore that the leadership of this panel has committed that at least once a year we're going to have a meeting about defense in depth, meaning how do we know that the canister system remains robust? What's the state of the technology? What's going on with it? What's up with the inspections? At present, the third quarter meeting, and I'll show at the end of this meeting today, a current sketch for the meetings for the rest of this year. The third quarter meeting, and probably on August of 2022, will deal with defense in depth issues directly on this topic of spent fuel storage and dry canisters. We're going to go first to someone who's dialing in. Last two digits of their phone number are 99. And so if we could bring them into the meeting so they can make their comment, and then we'll go to Nina Babiars. But first, 99. We can bring that person in.
They just have to dial *6 so they can get on.
Yeah, once you're in, you have to dial *6, and then you can unmute your line. So whoever's on phone number 99, I don't see it on the list of people who asked for the floor. But Sanjay, I think you need to bring them into the meeting. Okay, great. So I think 99 is now in the meeting. No, 99 just disappeared completely. And 99's back. Let's go to Nina Babiars, and then we will try again with the person who's dialing in from line 99. But Nina Babiars, the floor is yours. I think you're on mute still, but you can unmute directly. Nina, you're in the meeting. I'm just hoping you can click unmute on your line, and then we can speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can, loud and clear. Thank you.
Just so you know, Dr. Victor, when you call in by phone, you get in your ear that you're to hit *5 to unmute, not *6. It raises your hand, so it told me that my hand was raised 4 times. I just wanted to let you know there's an incongruency between, maybe that's what others are experiencing as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, let's reset the clock here, and I will bring it up with Microsoft, and I'm sure they're going to have a solution to that problem tomorrow morning. But thank you. We're still working on getting getting these things ironed out. Nina Babiars, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. This is Nina Babiars with Public Watchdogs. On November 11th, 2021, I posed a written question to San Diego Supervisor Jim Desmond, CEP meeting and founding member of Edison's coalition, that still goes unanswered today. It was regarding a statement Doug Bowder made at Southern California Edison's September 16th CEP meeting. I was shocked, surprised, and startled by Bowder's comments regarding the ultimate disposal of, quote, millions of pounds of songs decommissioning debris disposal. Bowder continued that there was, and I quote, a lot of shipping involved here, mostly via rail, and he added that we ship south for the most part. I have a couple questions that I'm hoping to get answers for today for all regarding the public safety concerns with Edison's waste being shipped through our neighborhoods. Number one, regarding Bowder's millions of pounds of songs demolition debris being shipped south, and knowing that San Diego County sits directly south of Songs, and also that the desert rail line that goes east is not operational, just where in San Diego County is this debris being dumped? Question number 2, if it's not being dumped in San Diego County, then where? Number 3, since any community near or adjacent to that site has a right to know about it, were local permits, as the DOE rep mentioned earlier today, secured prior to those shipments? Number 4, since Bowder's continued to extrapolate that the Songs, quote unquote, crushed concrete debris will be carried south by rail for another 3 or 4 years, and I understand that's billions of pounds now, and that there's, quote unquote, significant activity inside the reactor domes with some of that debris, the public is also confronted with more unanticipated inquiries like, what kind of testing, monitoring did Edison do, or Songs Solutions, or any subcontractor on the Songs site conduct on the demo debris prior to being shipped? Secondly, if Edison claims in the previous question that they're doing the radiation monitoring and testing of the debris, then what third-party independent measuring of potential radiation contamination is being conducted, held within all the millions of pounds of debris being shipped south? And finally, if no third party for independent radiation monitoring is being conducted, what can this Edison panel do to actually engage the community's legitimate safety concerns by insisting that independent monitoring of Songs debris is being shipped within our neighborhoods? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your comment, Nina Babiars. And then let's go back to the telephone that ends 99. Put that phone back into the meeting, and then we're going to try and get you to do sounds like *5 or *6. Okay, so let's Sanjay, we need to bring the phone into the meeting. So try *5 again.
Hello?
Yes, you can hear you.
Okay. I couldn't unmute on the website. I called in and had similar problems as Nina.
Can you just tell us, is this Kayleen Walker?
Kayleen Walker here.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
In general, I think if Edison and the DOE had been serious about this issue, and certainly it's nothing new, and they knew about this before they chose the Oceanside site there at San Onofre. This conversation should have happened before one canister was loaded, first of all. So this discussion seems kind of foolish. I don't know how many people have been in project management that you're going to build a wall, and you have big property, you're going to build a wall, And so you have a big pile of rocks delivered before you even know where the wall is going to be. And then you decide, oh, gee, that wall might need to be on the other side of the property. For example, maybe we want to be like the Canadians and put our deep underground dump just south of the Great Lakes, like Canada wants to do on the north side. Or perhaps we want to put them in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm certainly not recommending either one of those ideas, but the point is that why would you choose this arbitrary location to do this massive transport campaign, which I've listened in on the transportation meetings, et cetera. The DOE always claims the waste is safe, safely stored. Doug Bowder claims the waste is safely stored. However, we carefully watched the whole tech loading rollout, and we know from documents we got from FOIA that the canisters are embedded with carbon steel. And this seems to be a non-issue, even for the NRC. So Kim Petrie was acknowledging that in order for the new nuclear to really move forward, we need to acknowledge and solve the spent fuel problem. And someone else mentioned learning from other countries. Well, if you look at the Swiss system, they store their waste in containers that you can take the stuff out. If there's a problem with the fuel, you can repackage it. It's inside a building. There's pressure monitors in the containers. The hubris with which Edison speaks about, and the NRC and the DOE speaks about the safety of this waste is alarming. So, I mean, Mr. Bowder, have you looked at cladding embrittlement problems, hydride reorientation from the DOE? Are you familiar with the problems with hydrogen fuel in storage? I know that Daryl Dunn is on this meeting, or he was, from the NRC. And I know Brett Leslie from the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board is on this meeting. And they are both very familiar with the problems of hydrogen fuel in storage, never mind transport. So I suggest you not assume, Dr. Victor, that the public is in agreement with you. Those of us who have really studied it, not the people who are listening to the propaganda program and presenting their RFIs with behavioral psychology analysis. I think that there's the technical facts of this waste need to be really put on the table and solve the problem that this waste, regardless of where it is, needs to be safely stored indefinitely. Okay. The RFI, every time it was stated, it somehow, the word horrify, you say RFI, horrify. I'm horrified by this whole discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comment, Kayleen Walker. I think those are the public comments. I want to go back to Dan and Martha to continue the moderated discussion. Dan and Martha?
Martha, it's up to you.
There was one that was a question that was sent in by Don Hilgendorf, and I don't know whether he was online to speak or not, but his question was, I said, thanks for the opportunity to comment on your community meeting. Why isn't Songs being converted to a natural gas generating plant? Much of the infrastructure is already in place, land equipment, and the tie-in to the electrical grid. California needs more generating power to prevent future brownouts and blackouts. It won't come from renewables. I believe a big opportunity is going to waste here. And I think that's probably a Doug Bowder response.
Yeah, thank you for that, Martha. Yeah, just to, maybe I'll provide some context here. I don't know that I can answer the whole question around renewables versus power plants and spinning reserve and all that. Certainly there's been challenges that need to be addressed long-term with the ratio of power generation that has spinning reserve versus renewables. And I know that the California ISO organization is looking at that and has studied it and will continue to do so. Regarding the switchyard here, the interconnection point, I think that's entirely accurate. This is a key interconnection point between Southern California Edison's grid and San Diego Gas and Electric on the power flow from north to south and vice versa. You could postulate that putting another generating facility here would be beneficial to the grid. However, it's not our land. It's U.S. Navy property. We're committed to doing what our landowner specifies, which is safely decommissioning the plant and basically returning the property back to the Navy in good condition. And so, we realize the importance of the interconnection point, but that's about as much as we can do, pending any decision by the Navy to do something else with the property.
Thank you.
Doug, this is probably a question for you to begin with as well from Nina. And that is, there's a number of questions there. And as you recall, it had to do with the shipping. First of all, I guess comments that the debris is being shipped south through the San Diego area. And the question is, number one is, where in San Diego are these materials being dumped? If they're not going to San Diego, where are they actually going to? Another question is, since many of these materials may be coming from inside of the domes and may be radioactive, what testing is being done on these materials before they are considered safe to ship? And then also, if no independent agency is actually monitoring these testings or these tests, how can the public be assured that the materials being shipped are safe?
Dan, thanks. There's a number of parts to that question and those comments. So if I missed part of it, please get me back on track. First, the topic came up, I believe, in the September timeframe because Amtrak had temporarily stopped its trains based on some support issues they had with the rail bed, really in San Clemente. And so the topic came up, about our shipping and all of that. And the shipper, the railroad that ships the waste from Songs is BNSF Railways. And I believe Union Pacific is involved as well. The fact is, everybody was right. The question was, does the waste go south or north? The cars are actually pushed south. They're collected, and then they're pulled north, and they're not deposited anywhere in San Diego County. The low-level waste goes to a Clive, Utah facility that we've discussed here in prior meetings. The Clive, Utah facility is licensed as a Class A receipt facility, and that's where the bulk of the waste from here goes. It's very low-level waste to be deposited there. And there will be more shipments, many more rail shipments, because it's so much safer than using truck shipments. And as we've discussed before, one rail car is worth about 6 trucks. So the shipments are done under license requirements by Department of Transportation and under the purview of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Surveys are done on the low-level waste as it's being loaded, and verification that the low-level waste that meets low-level Class A requirements or less before it's shipped. The NRC also inspects our shipping through on-site inspections here at Songs and also inspection of our records. Furthermore, the waste is surveyed at receipt, so we're held accountable to making sure that when it reaches Clive, in this case Clive, Utah, it meets the low-level requirements. I don't know, did I cover it? Is there aspects of it I missed? I was trying to take notes while Nina was talking, and also when you were laying the outline out for the question.
I think you've covered those. I know David Victor has actually been up there to visit. I unfortunately was not able to accompany him. Anything you want to add to that, David?
Well, I guess the one other part of Nina's question was, how do we know Clive consented? This was kind of resonates with what Tom Isaacs was saying, and that this may not be a fair question right now because we may not know everything about Utah politics and local siting on the spot. But I'm just curious as to how we know. I heard nobody said we're not consenting up there. Quite the opposite. Lots of people employed in the facility. They seem very happy to be having the facility. But we're confident, I assume, that Clive consented.
I don't know that I can answer that, David, with respect to the process for which they received the license. I think Clive the facility is run by Energy Solutions, and they've held the license for quite a lengthy time period. I don't know for the initial siting and licensing process, the level of public consent that was reached or achieved there. So maybe we can table that unless someone else from the songs team, or Tom, you might know, Tom Isaacs, just based on your knowledge of how the whole industry worked through this, but I think their licensing process was pretty standard in Clive.
I don't know the process that was used. Obviously, the standard for public acceptance has been a moving target through the years. And so I don't remember exactly when Clive was established, nor do I know what the process was for consulting with the local community.
Well, let me work with some folks who are interfacing with Clive to find that out. I think it helps richen our understanding of what consent means, because consent has evolved over time. The Clive facility is very old, and it began originally as a place to store materials related, I believe, to a Superfund site in Salt Lake City. So it was kind of a local facility, and then they realized that they were pretty good at doing what they were doing and expanded to do other things, and in particular now is the site. When Tim and I went to Zion outside Chicago, they were sending all of their low-level waste to Clive, for example, and lots of other facilities are doing something similar. So I think it's a good set of questions from Nina, and thanks for clearing up the confusion about the temporary adjustments in the rail routes, but let me also find out some more information about the consent issues in Clive. Back to you, Dan and Martha.
One other thing that Nina mentioned was some of the reactor internals, if that debris was going to Clive as well. And I think, Doug, you discussed this at one of our previous CEPs, that the higher than level A waste was treated like spent fuel and would be in a canister locally. Is that correct? Do I remember that correctly?
Right, Martha. That's part of it. Maybe to go through it briefly, there's low-level waste, which is classified A, B, and C. Clive, Utah receives our Class A and less waste, which is primarily concrete and fill and things like that. And then there's the Class B and C waste, which is still low level. And much of that goes to a waste WCS facility run by Interim Storage Partners in West Texas. And it's safely shipped there under all required licenses and surveying that is done as we ship that. And by the way, we used that facility when the units were operating as well. And then there's greater than Class C. So it's still low level, but it's greater than Class C. And some pieces of the reactor internals, after they're cut up here and segmented, will be safely stored in canisters, actually, that are just like our fuel canisters, stored in the canisters to meet license requirements, and stored with our fuel here on the horizontal system, the Areva TN system at Songs. And that waste will be stored until it can properly be disposed, because it is greater than Class C, but it's still low-level waste.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I think one of the other questions that was mentioned by, Patrick and Alice, and I think we touched briefly on this in Dr. Petrie's presentation, is consolidated interim storage versus permanent repository. And one of the commenters said that legally you can't do interim storage unless you already have an operating permanent repository. And maybe that's clarification from Dr. Petrie or someone on her team.
Yes, I can answer that. Okay. So we can't immediately address changes to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which is the law that governs this kind of thing, but it is something that we recognize needs to happen. And while new legislation would be required to build an interim storage facility, there is a range of activities that the department can pursue now. And so as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, we did get funding to move towards establishing an interim storage program using the existing authority that we have. That includes collaborating with the public and potentially interested communities on the consent-based siting process and identifying an interim storage site. So DOE believes that current law, including Subtitle C of Title I of the NWPA, allows the department to proceed with a consent-based siting process, negotiate an agreement with the host community, and design and seek a license for an interim storage facility. Further development and operation of an interim storage facility are subject to specific constraints that would need to be addressed. I think that answers the question.
Thank you. That does explain it. Thank you.
Here's a question for Tom Isaac. Tom, there were some comments, and I'm actually going to turn it into a question, about what's in it for the local community in terms of being willing to host consolidated interim storage. So my question to you is, and maybe you could add something in terms of, has a value proposition been explored up in Canada? And in that negotiation, what are the local communities receiving in exchange for agreeing to host the spent fuel?
Thank you. So that's a really good question, because what a community might want is not necessarily knowable at the beginning. And so what has happened in Canada is that these communities, some of which are quite small and remote, others less so, were given the resources once they were in the running, if you will, as a candidate, to do what were called visioning exercises, so that the community itself was given the opportunity to think through what they would like to have happen to make their community better off were they to consider being a host. So rather than somebody saying, well, this is an unwanted facility, how much money do you need to take in order to be willing to take this terrible thing? It was more of an approach, kind of like David Victor suggested, which was, what can bringing this facility do to make the future for that community in line with where they would like to see it going? As an example, in Canada, many of the communities were traditionally forestry or mining communities, which tend to go boom and bust. And as you might imagine, that in some cases, these communities, their future didn't look very bright and the young people were leaving. So the question was, how do you maintain a vibrant, hopeful future for these communities? And the answer was not just money. It was, how do we work together in a partnership so that the community can benefit in ways that will enliven and perpetuate the health of the community measured by metrics that the community sets. Now, they are not finished yet, because no community has yet signed what's called the partnering agreement. But that's the ultimate objective, would be to identify a partnering arrangement going forward for the many years that are required that would meet the needs of the community. And if you want to see something closer at hand, I would say look at what happened at WIP and ask yourself whether or not the community itself feels like it has benefited in a variety of ways, and whether the state of New Mexico has benefited in a variety of ways as a result.
Can I just ask whether, I don't want to put you on the spot, Kim Petrie, but Kim, do you have any further views about that? Because it seems like that's the end, that's the goal that you've articulated for the process that the federal government is pursuing. Does what Tom Isaacs what he just said, does that resonate with you? Does that seem right? Or you have concerns about how that's going to unfold in the real world?
Sorry, technical difficulties. Tom's been doing this. He's been in this arena much longer than me, but you've heard what we've stated about these issues. So, I mean, I don't have anything else to add to that, I think.
Okay, no, thanks. I just wanted to check in because it seems like this is all now resonating, but I can also appreciate that this is early days for the DOE process. Back to you, Martha and Dan.
Tom, I have a kind of follow-on question. When you said, well, just look at what happened to WIP in New Mexico, do you have some insight on what that community thinks they benefited from by having WIP?
Some, I think others probably have more, but certainly the community of Carlsbad, New Mexico initiated the discussions with the Department of Energy originally about the idea of hosting a facility. That was a potash mining town. The potash mining had gone south. They were looking for new ways of invigorating the community, and that began an extended process which brought certainly money, jobs, resources, research and development, notoriety from people around the world coming there to see the operation, to collaborate. So I think the community benefited greatly. I think another couple interesting points were that for WIP, much of the waste was coming from New Mexico and was going to come by road through Santa Fe, the state capital, which is hundreds of miles away from WIP, and has a very different political outlook about the benefits of the facility hundreds of miles away. But one of the things that was negotiated between the government and the state of New Mexico was, in return for allowing WIP to go forward, the Department of Energy built a bypass around the city of Santa Fe so that the waste would not go through the middle of Santa Fe. And that was actually done, and there's now a bypass around Santa Fe, actually a hub of commercial benefit to the community of Santa Fe and folks more broadly. Those are examples of the kinds of negotiated, over long periods of time, negotiated understandings and agreements. There are more that I won't take time with now, that give you a flavor for the extended partnering, if you will, that gets hopefully built over time, that leads to a sense of trust. Was it perfect? No. Did everybody agree to everything? No. Was it allowed to move forward? Ultimately, yes.
Thank you. Appreciate your insight.
I just want to thank you, Tom. I thought that was very enlightening, and how those really resonate with those three elements that you feel are necessary for building trust. David, there were a number of comments, fewer questions. I think those are all the ones that I've noted down that actually turned into questions. Martha might have one or two others, or you may as well.
Martha?
There was one other, I think Kathy touched on it, and maybe the idea on the RFI and some of the social aspects of it, and one person kind of mentioned that in a negative way, but the idea of getting the information about the RFI out to the public, you've already talked about that, but one of the comments was to other marginalized communities who may not have the communication infrastructure to get information in a language they understand, or that they don't have to go to the Federal Register to give their input or something. Maybe that's worth a little bit more elaboration from Dr. Petrie's team or her communications people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're happy to speak about that, because we've made we put a lot of effort into making sure that we're as inclusive as possible. So, for example, we've translated the request for information into several languages, and
wow.
I think about 8 of them, 7 or 8, and they're all on the the department's consent-based citing website, and that's just, and we're also using the RFI to inform us on how we can remove barriers to participation and how the public would like to receive this information. So we do hope that individuals on this call will consider sharing their perspectives about this specific topic with us, because we want to be more inclusive. And translating was just one example. So if there are others, we're happy to hear people's thoughts on it.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. And I agree with Dan. I don't think there were any other specific questions that haven't already been addressed.
I have like to pose. Actually, it relates to John Kotek. He said we talk about $40 billion in this fund, and Jim Leach says that it costs about $2 million per day. So my question is money still being collected and adding to that fund?
Yeah, no, so the collection of the fee from utility ratepayers was stopped, I think it was in 2014, because there wasn't a federal program being paid for. The balance in the waste fund continues to grow because there's next to no expenditure going on right now, in that the funds in the nuclear waste fund actually accrue interest at Treasury rate. So it's adding, I think it's about 1.7 billion per year is being added to the balance of the fund, just because the fund isn't being touched.
So here's a follow-up question. As these utilities, such as Southern California Edison, are filing suit for storing the fuel on site, where are those settlements coming from?
That comes from a separate account called the Judgment Fund, which it exists to pay judgments against the United States government.
Okay, good to know we've got that. Thank you.
Is that it? Dan, are you running out to get some money from the Judgment Fund, or are you finished with the questions?
Get on my bicycle right now.
Okay. Martha, I think that was the end of the list from you.
I think so.
I want to pause for just a moment and see. I want to first see if any other CEP members have any comments or questions, and I'm going to go to our speakers for one last opportunity if there are things that they would like to say. I'm not seeing any of the microphones on from the CEP members, so let me go first to you. Go in reverse order to Tom Isaacs, John Kotek, and then to Kim Petrie. And if folks from the county of San Diego or Orange County would like to say anything as well, please let me know. Just take your phone, your microphone off mute. But right now, to you, Tom Isaacs.
Thank you, David. I would simply like to congratulate and support DOE's efforts here to reinvigorate the program, to give some serious thought and insight into what's going to be necessary to improve the prospects for this program moving forward, and to know that they've got a lot of folks on this call and not on this call who are willing to help and support all their efforts moving forward. Thank you.
Excellent. I think just to that point, exactly, you have, among many other things, this local coalition that is looking for ways to really help connect all the pieces together and make this happen. Let me go to you, John Kotek, and then to Kim Petrie.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Nothing more to add other than to echo Tom's sentiments. Really want to thank, Dr. Petrie, Dr. Bickford, Dr. Howard, and the others involved, Elisa Trunzo, other former colleagues of mine who are working to resume this program. Wish you all the best of success, and know that we're here ready to help in any way we can. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Kim Petrie, I just want to see whether Christian Abouk and Crystal Jabara, whether Christian or Crystal, either one of you want to say anything further?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, on behalf of Supervisor Bartlett, we really thank everyone for being here, and as Tom said, thanks to the Department of Energy for really reinvigorating, and bringing light to a lot of this issue. This RFI is definitely going to help everyone out, and what we look forward to is really a huge participation from the communities between both Orange County and San Diego. So getting the word out there is important, and I know that's important to Supervisor Bartlett, and we just want to thank everybody for their time and for their efforts.
Thank you very much. And I'm not sure, Crystal, you wanted to anything further? Crystal?
Sure. On behalf of Supervisor Desmond, I want to say thank you for everyone who participates in the engagement panel, and we appreciate being here. I know he apologizes again for not being here at this meeting. It's really important. And to Nina, in her comment, she said she had sent an email to Supervisor Desmond. I apologize. I did not see that email. I'm going to go back and look for it within the supervisor's email. But if she would like to resend it, I will make sure that we respond to that email very quickly. So I apologize to her that we did not respond, and we will definitely do that in the future. So thank you.
Yeah. And let me also say that if 9 Public Watchdogs would like to make that as part of the record of the CEP, copy me on it, and I'll make sure it's included along with the responses. So just please do that. I want to give the floor back to Kim Petrie and her colleagues, and then Doug Bowder and I will say a few things at the end. But right now, the floor is yours, Kim Petrie.
Thanks, David. Okay, so I wanted to just make sure that I made perfectly clear how serious we're taking comments to the RFI, to the request for information. We're going to incorporate the feedback that we hear into our next steps. So everything that you submit will influence what the department does next. So we need a strong and inclusive response to help shape an interim storage program and the consent-based siting process in order for it to be successful. And so lastly, I just want to thank you for having us, and thanks for all the great comments and feedback. And we really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you all today. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Kim, and your colleagues. It's just really enormously valuable to us to be able to hear what's going on at the DOE, to see the energy behind this program and the real action, and for us to contribute wherever we can. I want to give the floor now, just as we close the meeting, to Doug Bowder for some closing comments, and I'll make a couple of closing comments, including about our agenda for the rest of the year. But Doug Bowder, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Once again, I want to extend my appreciation to those who really helped move the meeting along today. Dr. Petrie, John, Tom as well, in helping with the perspective beyond just the United States. I think this meeting meets what I like to call engagement and openness. This is one of the things, and really one of our pillars around decommissioning, the engagement piece. And, further, our purpose is to continue to build community involvement, and the community involvement around the Spent Fuel Coalition, the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions. Now, David, we'll figure out how to say that acronym better. I don't have it down either. But without the involvement, without the challenge, without the dialogue, we won't be able to shape our future. And we have to do this, even though it might seem like we're starting over in some ways. In other ways, we're doing it differently, and I think we're doing it better. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And apologies for the background noise. I'm under the flight path of Miramar, and it seems that it's time for people to fly. So I want to close with three things. First, I want to, as is our custom now, talk about the major takeaways, and I'll put this together with help from Edison into a single page that will circulate around to everybody. But I took 6 things out of today. One is we got an update on the federal landscape for moving spent fuel off sites such as San Onofre, along with the local perspectives from the Action for Spent Fuel Solutions Now coalition. And this is really one of our mechanisms for getting ourselves organized. It may be unpronounceable, but it's very, very important. Second is, in particular, we had a terrific update from Kim Petrie and her colleagues at DOE about the process that they have underway right now to frame up what will be a consent-based siting mechanism, and then later this year actually leading to discussions with real communities and nominating communities and making some progress on that front. I think it's really impressive how rapidly that process is going. The deadline for the consent inputs is the 4th of March. And there'll be a link to the process and the email address in the summary that I'm going to circulate around after this meeting. This is not a new question, but one thing that's new is the refocus on nuclear because of carbon, because of climate, and in particular the value of a diverse set of electric supplies, and notably clean, firm power, of which nuclear power is not exclusive, but certainly one important element. You can't be serious about this without some serious game plan for the back end of the fuel cycle, as it's known, spent nuclear fuel. And other countries are frankly making some progress. and we are not making as much progress. I think the fourth of six takeaways is that there are a lot of steps underway. It's really impressive to see how rapidly things have come together. There are appropriations in place. There's the process to figure out what consent means. There's a follow-on process to start to work with one or more communities. Seems like they've got the funding they need for a couple of years of work. And although the current levels of funding are certainly a small fraction of what they used to be, and one of the things we probably ought to be pushing for and getting the congressional delegation organized around is a clear appropriations and eventually statutory language changes as needed to turn these promising nascent ideas into reality. So that's the fourth of 6 points. Fifth is it's very clear other countries are way ahead of us, and they've thought about consent, and they're figuring it out. And there's no recipe book, but there's some basic logic, and the logic is work with the communities and figure out what they want and raise the odds of politically making that happen. And so I think it's encouraging to see that start to happen here, but frankly, we're behind. We're really behind. And the sixth and last thing I'll take away from today is we ought to have some input. There are lots of communities. The coalition's going to have input. The American Nuclear Society, Ted Quinn talked about, is going to have input. Lots of others are going to have input. Fantastic. The CEP ought to have some kind of input. We're not a decision-making body, so we can't have a CEP document saying this is what the CEP thinks about X or Y, because we don't make decisions that way. But we can have the leadership of the CEP reflect on conversations like this here, circulate around a draft, get some input if people have input, but most importantly, show engagement, building on the terrific opportunity to talk with Kim Petrie and her colleagues today. And so I'm organizing a meeting for next week with the CEP leadership to figure out what would we say when as an input to the RFI. And if people have views about, in addition to the public comments that have been made today and the other comments from the CEP members today, have views about what should be in that document, please share them, and we'll get it organized. So those are 6 things that I took away from today. I want to just go to the next slide briefly and give you a view of what it is that we're doing the rest of the year. So here we are today on February 10th. It's still February 10th. We're going to have at some point, I think in April, a consultation with CEP members, a chance for the members to get together, hopefully in person, as many as can make it, and talk about how things are going, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, how to improve our work. Those are always extraordinarily valuable meetings. Second meeting in June, probably around environmental topics, including an update on some of the offsets that have been done as part of the plant, the Wheeler North Reef and the Sindiguito wetlands. Third quarter meeting, as I mentioned earlier today, will probably be around defense in depth, so the monitoring and integrity programs around the casks, the canisters. In the fourth quarter meeting, I don't think we know the topic yet, but the world always seems to deliver new topics to work on, and so I'm pretty confident we'll have something useful to talk about. So that's the schedule looking forward. And then the last and final thing for today is to once again thank our guests, John Kotek, Kim Petrie, Tom Isaacs, and Kim Petrie's many colleagues who are doing terrific work at the Department of Energy. Thank all of them for their contributions and their ongoing work in this area, for spending some time with us. Wish all of you a safe trip home, which might just be across the living room since we're still in virtual mode, but safety nonetheless. And thank you all for such a terrific conversation today.